The following is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network.
Hey, this is Scott Norton, and you're listening to Keepin It Strong Style.
Yo, this is Rich Latta from One Nation Radio. This is brought to you by the Social Suplex Podcast Network. We present to you the Ace of Podcasts, Keepin It Strong Style. Let's go. It's the Ace of Podcasts, Keepin It Strong Style. Covering New Japan, they ready to hold it down. Jeremy Donovan and the young boy Josh. Come and hit a job out and bury all the frauds. From the Tokyo Dome over to the G1. Social Suplex is the network where we can get it done. I'ma chill and let them have it, cause this is just an intro. Keeping the strong style, 6 stars from the get-go, boy. Yeah, from Tampa Bay to the Tokyo Dome, this is Keeping It Strong Style with your hosts, Jeremy Donovan and the young boy Joshua Smith. And thank you for listening.
Welcome to Keeping It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts on the Social Suplex Podcast Network. The young boy Joshua Smith here, accompanied by special guest host Chris Samsa. On today's show, we'll be reviewing nights 15 through 19 of the G1 Climax 33 and covering all the latest in the world of New Japan Pro Wrestling. Please support our show by subscribing and following the Social Suplex Podcast Network or Keeping It Strong Style on the podcast app of your choice and leaving a rating and review. You can also get all the podcasts over at socialsuplex.com. Check out our Pro Wrestling Tees store, prowrestlingtees.com/socialsuplex. That's where you can get your official Keeping It Strong Style t-shirt. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider making a one-time or monthly donation by visiting socialsuplex.com/donate and clicking on the donate button under the Keeping It Strong Style logo. This week's episode is brought to you by the NJPW EXT browser extension, the only extension for NJPWworld.com. Frequently updated and with features like dark mode, improved translations and layouts, custom and shared playlists, synchronized viewing parties, and much, much more. It takes NJPW World to the next level. Visit njpwext.us today for details. And you guys are hearing it. I am recording not a solo show, but I have a guest accompanying me. We didn't think this could happen, but I think we figured it out. Chris, how are you doing?
Where there's a will, there's a way, Josh, and look at you coming up. Your camera looks clear. Your voice is coming through like it's the end of the G1. We did it. Look at you. I'm so proud. I'm so proud.
Yeah, and just peeling the curtain back a little bit. Last time me and Chris did a show together, I sort of had him doing producer duties, and we had so many technical difficulties. Not his fault, just like the stars were not aligned that night. And when we got done, I was like, "Are me and Chris still friends?"
I didn't consider that to be a failure. We figured that all out. It was just I'm set up to record like 3 to 6 minutes at a time because I have a history in the music industry. I'm not set up to record 3 hours at a time, though I'm sure I could figure it out, but I just don't want to. So here you are recording. We're on Zoom, which is, old school as it gets as when it comes to video chat. So that's another peek behind the curtain. So we're going vintage.
I've never used them before. Like for me, it's always been what's the other one?
There's Google, there's Teams. Everyone has something now. Skype, I guess, is the OG. That's
the one I always used to use. That's how like tech savvy I am, essentially.
Yeah. I think people still use Skype. I don't know. Whenever I do I obviously don't have my own podcast, so I'm inconsistently on different things, right? So right. I never really know what link is going to come through. So I try to be ready, but when you sent Zoom, I was like, oh no. I was like, I can't remember the last time I used the Zoom. So I go to open Zoom and it's like, this version of Zoom is way too old to do anything. So I had to reinstall, but here we are on the day after the G1 Climax has ended, and my adrenaline has not worn off yet. And so if we were to do this tomorrow night, you'd get a very tired version of Chris or just annoyed because I want to put it in the background. But here we are on the day of, excited to do a semi-instant reaction that people will then hear 2 to 3 days later. So
Yeah, it's great that you guys are we're getting to record so early. You know, we are recording on Sunday, August 13th, which is a little earlier than what we normally do during the week. Um, some of the good news with that is, you know, essentially we'll be able to put this out. You guys are going to be able to hear the show sooner. Some of the bad news with that is we're not going to be able to do questions and the news and the rundown and everything like that. But you know, we're going to get through it. I think next week I have another special guest host coming on, and we'll be able to address some more of those sorts of updates and everything. But let's jump into it. So, Chris, over the past week, we've had 5 nights of G1 Climax action. I know we want to definitely focus most of our attention on the finals here that just took place, but we do have to do a little bit of housekeeping and still address what took place during the block finals. I know it seemed like a million years ago at this point already.
Even though it was only 5 days ago. Yes, it does. It feels like a very long time when you're thinking about things like block math, and then the whole knockout stage was kind of a tournament in its own. So, I mean, if you think about it, there used to be 16 entrants in the New Japan Cup. So we basically got most of that when it really comes down to it. We got an 8-man tournament, which is more than AEW's running for their women's division right now. So not that I want to go in and talk about that, but
no, go ahead, talk about it.
You can't. It's not really a tournament if it's just qualifying matches for one match. So I love the product and I'm looking forward to Wembley, but that's still not a tournament. We got 4 blocks around robin that we finalized out, and then we built up an entire knockout stage, and then we went through it. So yeah, there's plenty to talk about. So but yeah, so those block match nights, they do kind of feel like a really long time ago, but now that I'm looking at the results, there is some fun stuff to talk about here, especially that C block main event.
Yeah, what I think I'll do here, I'll probably just run through the results, and then we can sort of have a more holistic discussion and run through each night. So night 15, which was the C block final, that took place on August the 8th, 2023, from Yokohama Budokan. The attendance here, 2,360 reported. And the results were as follows. Great O'Khan and Jeff Cobb defeated Kato Kiyomiya and Ryohei Oiwa. Bull Club War Dogs, Alex Coughlin and Gabe Kidd defeated Tomoaki Hanma Toriyano. Strong Style Trio defeated God, Hikuleo, and Jado, along with Shoto Umino. The TMDK team of Fujita, Shane Hayes, Zack Sabre Jr., they defeated the Chaos team of Goto and Yo, along with Oscar Luebe. And then LIJ, Bushi, Naito, and Yota Tsuji, they defeated Hiroshi Tanahashi, Master Wato, and Togi Makabe, which brought us to the final 4 matches of the C block tournament. Tomohiro Ishii defeated Mikey Nichols at 13 minutes and 1 second. Both men were eliminated. Tama Tonga defeated Hanare at 14 minutes and 30 seconds, which kept him alive in the tournament. Following that, David Finlay, along with Geto, defeated Eddie Kingston 16 minutes and 34 seconds, eliminating Eddie Kingston and securing a spot for David Finlay into the final 8. And then they made an announcement on the evening that should Shingo Takagi defeat Evil in that match, that they would have an automatic play-in match between Shingo and Tama Tonga for later in the evening. But if Evil won or drew or anything like that, he would continue on. And he did defeat Shingo Takagi 17 minutes, 40 seconds to be the second entrant from the C block.
The announcement that happened before the main event was the most important thing that happened on this night for me, because it established the plan for an quote unquote unbreakable tie going forward. And it was like public, it was in there. And like I had hypothesized, and I had talked to people like Joe Lanza, and we had thought that they were going to do that in the A block to get another Kiyomiya match in. But and I'm sure we'll talk about Kiyomiya because there's plenty to talk about there. But establishing that within kind of the true public canon of New Japan was really helpful for me going forward as I continue to, potentially cover and analyze these G1s and help people figure out who's going forward. At least I know what the option looks like. But also that main event had a little bit extra oomph behind it then, because people wanted people in the building wanted an extra match, right? Like, why wouldn't you want that? Even if it's Tama Tonga versus Shingo, and there's not a ton of backdrop there, but it could have been an interesting time. So I think it added a little bit of heat to the match, and I think that was one of the more fun Evil matches that I've experienced. And I think Evil has Evil, you're gonna have your opinion about Evil, whatever it may be, and I think Evil truly has great opponents. He doesn't necessarily have great matches. He's not there to do that. But he has opponents that people want to see win. So when you put Evil in the ring with a guy like Shingo Takagi that people really want to see win and advance, especially if it then means potentially another Shingo Takagi match, you're going to get some heat. So, and the match was a mess. It was the same thing it always is. This one had LIJ run-ins too, as well as all the House of Torture guys coming off of commentary and coming out of the crowd. But the crowd was so very into this match, so it was hard not to kind of get behind this one in particular. So had a really great time with that. And honestly, like, I think I called it on our preview show that I did with you guys here. I mean, David Finlay going through was kind of my lock of the tournament. So
right,
seeing him beat Eddie wasn't necessarily surprising, though. I also thought that was a good match, and I thought it really rounded out a really solid tournament from Eddie Kingston. I thought he really stepped up and showed up in a way that I didn't necessarily expect him to. I knew he would be like the emotional guy, but I think we got a lot more out of him there. So, and I think that there's more to come there too. So, C Block turned out to be what everyone thought it was going to be: big beefy boys slapping meat, right? Like, but some really standout stuff, just good solid G1 style wrestling, and of course you've got Tomohiro Ishii in the mix there too. He had another great tournament, even if it didn't turn out to be a successful one, which is pretty typical for Ishii's G1. So yeah, a solid night of action in Yokohama here.
Yeah, definitely agree with most of that. I thought the Ishii and Nichols match was a little bit underrated, and I really enjoyed it. I didn't think Mikey Nichols necessarily knocked it out of the park every time he was out there during this tournament, but the one thing he did do is every time he was in there with one of these traditional never style bruisers, he went to war, and that kind of fit into the theory that I had of why he might fit in better with this block. And this match with Ishii might have been his best match of the tournament, which was very fun and pretty hard hitting. The Tama Tonga Hinari match was fine. It just was what it was, but it did set up Tama Tonga being eligible to still go through depending on how the math fell, like you mentioned. I enjoyed Finlay and Kingston for what it was. What's funny is there were all these fan voices theorizing about Keito Kiyomiya maybe being like recruited by New Japan and everything, and I always felt like that was unlikely. But I kind of get the weird feeling like I wouldn't be surprised if down the stretch AEW let him go to New Japan and he just kind of comes over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I think AEW really loves having him on the shows too, though. I mean, I think he's got a really valuable role there. He's kind of the thread between a lot of different things that happen in that company, but it kind of a confusing thread in its own way with the Moxley Claudio stuff. And right. I know he's probably going to get really ingrained in whatever Ring of Honor looks like going forward. So there's plenty of work for Eddie Kingston to do. And I also know for a fact, I know that New Japan will take him whenever and wherever he wants to be, especially after this G1, which was solid enough. And I think he really got the fans behind him too with some of the shoulder content that he was able to put together. Meeting Kawada was really cool video that they put up. And when he did commentary too, the next night, he was just so engaging and just like thrilled to be there. So yeah, I don't think AEW would quote unquote let him go, but I could see if there's a gap in his schedule or a time that they don't need him on the calendar, I could see him spending plenty of time with New Japan doing all sorts of different stuff. He could be an ambassador for the brand for the US basically, because people love him here too.
Well, there was the recent thing with the what am I trying to think of? with their with the contract situation with Aussie Open, they ended up signing and going to AEW. So there's definitely some leeway as far as like people potentially signing with one company or the other. And there's all this speculation. A lot of people think that perhaps Will Ospreay, when his contract's up, he might sign a contract with AEW, that sort of thing. I personally, I don't know anything directly, but I just wouldn't be surprised if his contract came up and he was like, you know what? I like it in Japan. I'm going to New Japan. Like, that's what I'm saying. And I think he would really fit in really well if that ever did happen.
Yeah, or he could keep doing kind of this style of stuff. He could do kind of tour by tour. I mean, if he could link up with someone and do a World Tag League event, stuff like that. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't have to be G1, right? But like a full tour that I could see him doing would be something like World Tag League, where, you know, he links up with Ishii or Nagata or so, you know, someone that he pays so much deference to, and they make a team and they have a run at it, and maybe they win and go to Wrestle Kingdom and he gets to wrestle in the Dome, you know, like, I mean, that's the type of stuff that you could see New Japan starting to work out, because he is sort of ingrained in the fabric of both promotions, and I think that's a really neat place for him to be.
Well, Finley definitely fulfilled his destiny here, wanting to beat the man who beat the man that he should have beat, with the whole story revolving around Jay White's exodus from the company. So he picks up a quasi clean win here, pretty much almost totally clean over Eddie Kingston. And then the main event, the match with Evil and Shingo Takagi. I know you had some thoughts on it. I saw a lot of outrage, not just at the outcome, because obviously Shingo is beloved and a lot of people wanted to see him go through, but also the decision to have Evil go through from a booking perspective. The quality of the match was very much under fire from fans. This was one of the more controversial decisions of the entire G1 Climax in general. I personally, and this is just my feeling, I saw some of your tweets, so I know you kind of feel similarly, but we haven't spoken about it. I thought the match itself was great. In fact, I thought that this was one of the best Evil matches in a long time. Obviously, on this podcast, we've kind of buried Evil quite a bit, and I'm not a huge fan of the House of Torture shtick in general, but there are those times where the shenanigans build up and build up and build up, and the drama escalates and the crowd gets into it. And with the stakes that were involved, like you mentioned, plus the outside interference from LIJ coming in to make the save, and the twists and the turns. Was it overbooked? Absolutely. Was it a Vince Russo special that you could have seen in TNA in 2003? Like, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it was still highly enjoyable. It just unfortunately fell in a certain way to where Evil picked up the win. But must I remind the fans listening, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but we've seen this kind of match many times where Evil loses in most cases. And on this particular instance, he just happened to be able to squeak by. He low-blowed Shingo Takagi and picks up the win, but the crowd was super invested. The drama was super high. And then once the rest of the tournament unfolded, it made a lot of sense why Evil was the guy to go through. Me personally, I would have loved had it been Shingo, but I think the scores and the reviews and the ratings I saw for this were, being a disaster and a train wreck, they're not really indicative of what I saw on that night from, as far as my enjoyment of the match.
I mean, so here's the thing. Evil coming into this match was 3-10 in G1 main events all time. Like, that was his G1 main event record, was 3-10. He had lost 5 straight G1 main events. So, I mean, and that went all the way back to the final block night of 2020 when he lost to Sonata in the main event. So we are looking at almost 3 years. Wait, 2020, 21, 22, 4 years, 4 whole tournaments of Evil losing in the main event, which is, it lines right up with when the turn happened, when House of Torture was formed and Evil left LIJ. All of those losses led everyone to believe, oh, this is just gonna be another Evil match where all the shenanigans happen and the babyface is the winner, right? And that's all of those matches happened to build to this point where you were like, well, Shingo's got to win, right? Because Evil always ends up losing these big main events. And I don't know how many people actually realize that, but that's what they've been taught by what has happened in the past. And then he's got to pull one through at some point. So, because otherwise it just becomes a joke. And it had kind of gotten to that point. And now everyone's back to talking about Evil and how they feel about Evil and how they feel about, their beloved New Japan having, the sanctity of their New Japan being dishonored. There's been a couple of audio pieces that have spent plenty of time talking about how terrible it is and how meaningless it is that Evil moved through to the top 8 of a G1 Climax tournament. I mean, your territory has to have a heel.
Yeah.
It doesn't work with a bunch of baby faces. It doesn't work with a bunch of wrestlers that you like, that everybody likes, right? So you have to do this. You have to put these guys in these spots sometimes. So, I mean, sure, would I have loved to see Shingo versus Sonata instead? Yeah, probably, but I get it, right? You gotta do this stuff. You have to build up some heels, because otherwise your top 8 would have been Sonata, Shingo, Okada, Zack Sabre Jr., David Finlay, Will Ospreay, Naito, and Hikuleo. Like, David Finlay's the only real heel in there. I guess Ospreay switches back and forth. Sabre tries to toe the line, but you have to have some evil in
yeah.
No, I mean, pun completely intended. Like, you have to have some evil in with all this good. So, and also, honestly, they pulled it off, and they pulled off the next one too.
I think it kind of also elevates the block standings just a bit. And I know that sounds counterintuitive because of course, it would be quote unquote more prestigious and to a lot of the work rate fans to have Shingo go through. That's a more prestigious thing. But it would just be kind of chalk, like the guys you're expecting to go through, and then you're not looking at those block matches as having that reverence. But when you do something that's irreverent, it's almost like, oh, you've broken the sanctity of what these block matches were. They've never had those block matches until recently, at least in the modern sense of the tournament. So it's like, oh, wow, like you crossed the line, and it establishes that the line is there. So maybe going forward that, people kind of have higher hopes and expectations for these block matches.
I mean, they just bought 2 years of people believing that Evil is a reputable challenger again. And,
yeah, pretty much.
And to me, that's good. I think you got to keep these guys heated up. I mean, he had downcycled for 2 years prior to that. He had been hanging out in the low cards. He's been doing cork and stuff, cork and level stuff. And yeah, you got to drop these guys into some spots. And sure. I had no issue with it at all, especially because it set up Evil and Sonata. And of course that's what we're going to get going forward again, but that's a whole nother ball of worms. But
two things I didn't like that, and we'll move on to the next night. But one, I would have liked for one of these nights where they had one of these unbreakable ties for there to be that tiebreaker match that we didn't expect at the end. That would be cool. I think that's something they should think about doing in the future if they're going to continue with these formats. And then number 2, it didn't make a lot of logical sense that Tama Tonga didn't come out and try to make a save and rescue his own G1. He kind of looks like a fool for just staying in the back and letting Evil in the House of Torture pretty much ruin his tournament.
For all we know, he had no idea what the rule was, and that if they had an unbreakable tie, he had another match. So he could have been in the shower, hanging out in the bus. He's got his headphones on. His beats are rolling already.
That's why you got to do like the Bill Watts. You have to sit in the back and watch the boys work. Otherwise, you never know what could happen. So we move on to night 16, final block night, D block action from Act City, Hamamatsu. The attendance was 2,001. This was on August 9th. And House of Torture's team of Evil and Show defeated Eddie Kingston and Yuto Nakashima. TMDK's team of Kosei Fujita and Mikey Nichols defeated Kato Kiyomiya and Ryohei Oiwa. Hikuleo, Wato, and Umino defeated Bull Club War Dogs, Finley, Gabe Kidd, and Geto. The United Empire's Great Okan and Hanari defeated Tomoaki Hanma and Tomohiro Ishii. Strong Style Trio defeated the LIJ trio of Bushi, Shingo, and Yota Tsuji. That brings us to D block action. Alex Coughlin defeats Toru Yano at 5 minutes and 7 seconds. This was after quite a bit of lengthy brawling prior to the beginning of the match. Jeff Cobb defeats, he goes to a double countout with Shane Haste at 11 minutes and 10 seconds, bringing him up to 9 points, keeping him alive in the tournament, but putting him in a precarious position. Zack Sabre Jr. defeated Hiroki Goto in the semi-main event, bringing him up to 10 points and qualifying him for a spot in the tournament. And in the main event, Tetsuya Naito defeated Hiroshi Tanahashi at 17 minutes and 54 seconds to secure his spot in the tournament, effectively eliminating Jeff Cobb. They also did make another announcement earlier in the evening that in the event of an unbreakable tie, there could have been a play-in match, but that did not end up happening here.
And the Cobb Haste double count out was actually really clever, and how they executed it was really clever too, because Haste needed to at least reduce the likelihood that Cobb would go through. So by having that draw, Shane Haste, who's a member of TMDK with Zack Sabre Jr., ended up helping his unit mate, who had a chance to go through. So it ended up being this kind of point of connection through everything, which is kind of brilliant, that they actually used the kind of unit layout in their favor here to kind of balance the booking in a way that actually made sense. It wasn't just some random double count out. It was very intentional from Haste, and Cobb knew what he was doing. So that was the story of that match. And then Naito and Tanahashi turned back the clock. I mean, this is the beginning of a great Naito run. I mean, I'm sure anyone who's listening to this knows how it all ends, right? But Tanahashi and Naito, they'd both had an entire week off since their last match. Their last match before this was on August 2nd, and this was on August 9th, and they clearly got some rest and got themselves prepared and stretched out and ready to go. And they really did kind of turn back the clock to have a really, really, really solid G1 match. The best version of a G1 match that you could imagine from Tetsuya Naito and Hiroshi Tanahashi in 2023. So, yeah. I mean, Tanahashi pulled out all the stops. We got, high fly flow. We got aces high. We got, from the turnbuckle to the floor. I mean, he really gave Naito everything he could give Naito. And I think that says a lot about how people feel about Tetsuya Naito in that group. So, and probably where Tanahashi knows he is now. So it was cool to see though. And it was good to see Tanahashi pull one out. I think he's been wrestling a lot. He's got a lot of singles matches and random stuff in the US. And, and I get it, right? You got to strike while the iron's hot and people still want to see you. But I think this shows what Tanahashi can do if he's got a little bit of space and time to build up a match with someone who really knows how to do that, like Tetsuya Naito. So it was a cool night. It was, I left this one on a little bit of a high too, just with the Naito Tanahashi match really delivering way more than I thought it was going to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a lot of cool stuff. It wasn't the strongest in-ring night for the first two block matches, but there was definitely story elements to kind of sink your teeth into. So, I mean, even with Yano came out and it seemed like he was, probably intending to be jovial trickster Yano, but he got jumped before the bell by Alex Coughlin and Gabe Kidd. And from there, like that just kind of, basically like, it's funny because there's Liger and then there's the Keishin Liger alter ego. Well, like for Yano, there's regular Yano and then there's Great Bash heel Yano. And he like flipped that switch and turned into that guy and started bashing these guys with, chairs and tables and kind of brawling all throughout the building. And it's almost like this mythical alter ego that he has now. And even at one point he threw he powerbombed Gabe Kidd through a table on the outside, right, which was pretty awesome, and tried to stab Gabe Kidd with scissors
Yeah, well, that was towards the end, right?
Yeah, but ultimately he got caught in the jackhammer, so Alex Coughlin picks up the win. But at least we, for those people that aren't huge fans of the bullshit that you get with a regular, G1 Toriano match, you got the violent side of things. So that was a change of pace. With the match with Cobb and Shane Haste, I thought they were working pretty well together. The match was fine. But then obviously, like you mentioned, it ended in a double countout. And there's that story element where Shane Haste is trying to keep Zack Sabre Jr., the front man of his TMDK group, his G1 run needs to stay alive. In order for that to happen, he either needs to beat Cobb or at least keep him at just 1 point gain. So I get the logic of it, but it does suck to have this guy in the middle of the card in an anticlimactic finish where he's just getting held down by Shane Haste on the outside, especially considering how Cobb continuously has great G1s and then falls short for whatever reason down the stretch. And in this one, he had big wins over both Naito and Zack Sabre. I'm not saying he needed to go through, but it just felt like such a whimper to the tournament that he'd already had. You know what I mean?
Well, that was the story of his tournament. He got the hot start and the fall off. I mean, there's only so many different arcs you can have, and you've got 32 arcs to book right now. So that was the Cobb arc. I mean, because he's a threat. He's gone through plenty of G1s where he has these big runs. He had the one where he broke the record for the most consecutive, but for however long he went undefeated. So that they're playing off of some of that history. And I just
personally didn't enjoy the ending of the match. I would have liked something a little more definitive, especially since, Shane Haste had a big win over Naito and is, conceivably capable of beating him in some way.
But if he lost, he was essentially eliminated.
That's true.
And the draw kept him alive. And it was a good story from Haste. It tied TMDK together, even, a little bit tighter. I think there's just a lot of threads there that, I think the booking there was good. The other option was probably, Haste beats him. And, I don't know what that looks like going forward unless it wouldn't be a purposeful win if you're thinking just about the booking, because it's not like Cobb doesn't hold a tag title, so you can't, drop TMDK and do a tag picture. Like, all you're doing is really like extending the a story that doesn't have any extension to be had.
I just hated it.
Yeah, well, you're wrong, so it's cool.
No, it's not even the booking.
It's okay to have an incorrect opinion every now and then.
It's not that the booking's bad. I just didn't enjoy the finish. I was like, womp, womp, womp. But anyways.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, no one likes an 11-minute double count out is not the same as like a time limit draw. So it's not like we even got the drama of the time limit draw, but once you kind of keyed in on what was happening, it was like, can Shane Haste, he's established that he's not even going to try to beat him. He just wants to tie. Right. So he could either like run around for 20 minutes and do 20 minutes of Toriano shtick, or he could do this. So I prefer this.
The Zack Sabre Jr. and Goto match. Now they've had quite a few good matches together. Last year's G1 was, in my opinion, a standout match, but I felt like this one might even be better than that one. It was really good. And, they had a great story, especially considering all the, whether they're real or imagined, injuries that Goto had accumulated throughout the tournament. They really played off that quite a bit, and Goto turned it up big time in this match, but ultimately Zach was able to get him in a compromised position with one of his crazy submissions and, tap him out and win definitively. And I thought it was a very good match. And then I loved the main event. It's one of my favorite matches of the entire G1. I did not expect Naito and Tanahashi to have a match this good. And there were so many like little elements that were really great, like Tanahashi going for a quick roll up to start the match.
Yeah, that
set the tone. And there were a lot of things where like Naito typically takes his time with maneuvers and, holds on to things for a long time, but because of the time limit with the 20 minutes and all of the urgency that was there, they were both letting go of moves very quickly. And down the stretch, once it became clear that like Tanahashi hit the aces high twice, and he went for the high fly flow, and he caught the knees. And we're getting really close to the time limit. Both guys just started spamming like roll ups, and because they weren't going to be able to get their finisher on each other. And Tanahashi came close many times to beating Naito, but ultimately Naito was able to outmaneuver him and hit him with that spinning tornado DDT. And throughout this tournament, he's been rolling people up with that, where he goes into it, but he goes through and does the roll up. But in this one with Tanahashi took the bump and like got dropped on his head like a stack of dimes, and then took the roll up. And I was like, oh, he beat him. It's incredible.
The sound,
Yeah.
It didn't sound great. It was alarming. Yeah. Yeah, it was one of those things where as soon as that happened, I was like, oh, I hope that's the finish. And then they actually counted the 3, and I was like, oh, thank God. Like, because it was violent.
It was a
cool,
great finish.
It was a cool move. It was a cool finish, especially between these two with a ton of history. Sometimes you gotta do it like that. So yeah, I really enjoyed that match. I love that they were able to turn back the clock.
So that took us to the semifinals, and the situation we found ourselves into was Tetsuya Naito taking on Hikuleo, and Will Ospreay taking on David Finlay. The winner of those two matches would face one another, with Evil taking on Sonata, and Okada versus Zack Sabre Jr. in the main event. Night 17 took place on August the 10th from Funabashi Arena. The reported attendance, 2,790 were there. There were several dark matches involving the Young Lions. Yuto Nakashima went through one of those challenge series that we've been hearing about with, you get a certain amount of wins, and you get, what is it? What is the prize they get for that? It's like meat or something.
$2,000 worth of meat.
Yeah, you get meat and then potentially like a TV title challenge. But unfortunately, he went to the time limit draw with Oiwa and Luebe, and then was defeated by Oleg Boltin in 52 seconds in the third match. We didn't get to see any of this, but that took place on that evening. Following that, on the undercard, LIJ, Hiromu, Shingo, and Yota Tsuji defeated the Team DK team of Fujita, Mikey Nichols, and Shane Haste. God, along with El Phantasmo and Shota Umino, defeated the Strong Style Trio along with Hiroshi Tenzan. Bull Club's Alex Coughlin, Chase Owens, Gabe Kidd, and Kenta defeated Just Five Guys, Doki, Taichi, Taka, and Kanemaru. And then Eddie Kingston, Tanahashi, and Tomohiro Ishii defeated the United Empire team of Great Khan, Hanare, and Jeff Cobb. And then following that, that took us to the quarterfinal matches, where Tetsuya Naito defeated Hikuleo with Jado at 13 minutes and 11 seconds. Will Ospreay, accompanied by Great Khan and Jeff Cobb, defeated David Finlay, accompanied by Coughlin, Kidd, and Geto, 17 minutes and 21 seconds. Evil in the semifinal defeated Sonata in 16 minutes and 16 seconds. And then your main event, Kazuchika Okada defeated Zack Sabre Jr., 21 minutes and 46 seconds. So essentially coming out of this, we ended up with semifinals, Naito versus Ospreay and Evil versus Okada.
Yeah, I think people could point to this as a show that made them feel like it was kind of an old school G1.
Yeah.
Right? Like you've got 4 block matches and some undercard tags that are kind of leading to stuff that's happening either tomorrow or the next night, or just like into the future. So I think the pace of the show was really good. I think it was kind of classic that way. Naito Hikuleo was surprisingly good. I think Naito like found it and just didn't let off the gas for the whole end of this tournament. It was really cool to see, especially if you go back then, you start to look at some of the matches he had, before the ones that we'll talk about. Like you can see him start to check in a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more and put it all together. And then all of a sudden, really the Tanahashi match, you start to look at Naito and you're like, oh, it's Naito. Like we're doing this. And the Hikuleo match, I think was some of that too. We got Hikuleo in there with a really good seasoned veteran wrestler. Hikuleo showed up for that and had a really good showing. And then Naito, obviously pulled out the win. Ospreay, defeated Finlay. He's given Finlay that win in the past. but this year was not the year for that. Evil going through over Sonata is another one of the, I'll send you back about 15 minutes in the podcast for my whole spiel about Evil. Same feeling though. I mean, you could send Sonata through, have Okada knock out Sonata, do Okada Sonata again. Like, I had that all laid out, sent a tweet out. I was like, here's what I think might be going down. It's just 3 Sonata Okada matches all at Ryogoku this year, which would have been kind of a neat arc to have, but not the direction they're going. I think, Sonata is up to some other stuff, and maybe they don't want to give Sonata a really big scalp right now. They want to just keep him busy and keep him winning. So having Evil knock him off with unclean means, I think that's one way to knock out your champion. And of course, Okada and Zack Sabre Jr. was fantastic. I mean, like, they went back to what they do best too, and really just put on a show. So yeah, quarterfinal night was really, really a fun time. Solid matches, and it is nice to get the undercard tags back in as all these block matches have gone on too. I mean, it's just kind of it's the vibe of the last 7 G1 shows was more similar to what I think people typically expect.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed about the undercards, we're going to talk about the semifinal and the final night here in just a moment. There was a lot more story elements that were playing into the undercards there, sort of setting up what we're going to see on Destruction Tour. That wasn't so much the case with these other undercard matches, but because a lot of these guys were rested, hadn't been on the tour, and they were in front of larger crowds at this point, we really got a lot of super fun, energetic undercard tag team matches that were a breeze to just go through in a 1 hour time span almost every night, with very little to almost no bad matches whatsoever. So, I mean, some of that stuff might be like skippable in the sense of like, yeah, it's not required viewing, but I watched all of it. I thought it was great across the board. There was a lot of energy from everybody involved in that aspect.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of easy to watch stuff on the undercard for all this stuff. So, and you're right, as you go through the semis and especially the final night, I mean, we got stories for days. I mean, literally, it's a very long list of forward motion here.
Now, I do agree with you that I felt like Naito turned it on in this match with Hikuleo, but I do disagree in a certain respect. I didn't think Hikuleo looked good in this match whatsoever. In fact, I thought Hikuleo got lost multiple times throughout the match and also had several miscommunicated, like, botched spots that I was like, what is going on in this match? So much so that I was like, I know that last week on the show, I kind of voiced my displeasure with him being the one that got through, but that was more just personal preference because I wanted to see some of those other guys go through. But at this point on this night, granted, it was only a 13-minute match, but like, I felt like he was lost out there with Naito, and Naito had his working boots on and was trying to make a match out of it, to where I was like, damn, he might not be ready for this level. Maybe he's not the guy that should have gotten the nod here, especially if, whoever did go through, whether that was like Umino or Tsuji or Gabe Kidd or whatever, they would have been losing to Naito anyways.
Yeah, but then you're putting one of them above the others. And
I would have been fine with that.
I know you would have been fine with that. Clearly, it's not what they were trying to do. They deadlocked that group basically.
Right.
Well,
there's always Kiyomiya, who should be above all those guys anyways.
Should he?
I think so. Yeah.
Why?
Because he's the ace of Noah.
What has he proven in a blue ring?
He was great in the block. He was arguably maybe the standout guy in the A block.
But who did he beat?
He beat Tsuji, and he beat who else?
This man came over from as Noah's ace and went 2-3-1.
Right, and that's
bad. That's bad. Very bad.
That's bad booking.
Is it?
Yeah, it's bad booking.
By who?
By Gato.
Did Gato? I mean,
Gato it's also bad mismanagement.
This man
from
is
Noah.
not under This man's exactly. So
it's both.
So everyone who's been complaining about Noah burying Kiyomiya through, I don't know, starting with the Muto stuff, right?
Yeah.
They're just, Noah's still got shovels full of dirt for this guy, apparently. Because there's no way Kiyomiya goes over. And, to what benefit how does it benefit New Japan if Kiyomiya goes over strong?
Well, I mean, the only thing with that is if it hypothetically could do more business down the line with the matches between the two companies, that might be mutually beneficial hypothetically. But
you have to know that you've got that in pocket, and I don't think there's actually anything in pocket with
there
these
might not
two.
be. But,
yeah, so, and I think everyone thought there was because we don't always see outsiders from domestic outsiders in G1. But I mean,
if Hikuleo showed up on this night and looked like, what maybe the way he did against like Jay White when they had their match and really turned it on and had a great outing, I'm right there with you. But he looked terrible on this.
But hear me out here. It's you. I know that you're an in-ring guy more than anything. Like that's really, really important to you. I think think about Hikuleo as a better version of Bad Luck Fale.
I don't know that he is a better version of Bad Luck Fale.
Hikuleo's ceiling being that of a better version of Bad Luck Fale.
Right.
I'm not trying to analyze where he's at right now.
Sure.
I'm trying to analyze where they want him to be and what role they want him to play in the company. And that to me that's the role. It's this monster guy that can beat anyone on any night, but also can easily get outsmarted and lose. And you have to, again, the 2023 G1 Climax is about 2026 and 2027. It's not about 2023.
Right.
But I mean, obviously you had to run the tournament, which is why you still got guys like Tetsuya Naito winning the tournament. But all the work that got done on the undercard is the stuff we'll be talking about in 4 and 5 years. My dogs agree.
I agree with you. My thing with it is, how other people were upset about the G1 because, like we mentioned, Evil went through and they're like, oh, that's bad booking. And maybe to some extent it is.
I mean, they're wrong.
To me, putting Hikuleo through when he's not ready is maybe more detrimental because I feel like for a Tetsuya Naito, him going through and having the win over not a Hikuleo, but having the win over Kiyomiya is a bigger deal. It's a bigger feather in his cap. It's a better path for him to have gotten to the finals than to have gone through Hikuleo. If Hikuleo was ready, which I don't think he was,
but
then it would be fine. I just didn't think he was ready for this spot from what I saw.
But Hikuleo's clock is ticking a lot faster. So if
because he's older,
yeah. So if they want him to land in this position for a couple of years, even, you kind of have to just throw him into it and see if it works. And it, to some extent, it did. He got a ton better. I think he looked a lot better in the tail end of the tournament than he did at the beginning.
That's true, but he also got booked stronger down the tail end too.
Well, maybe that helps, right? Maybe that's his role. His role is to be this guy that gets booked strong. His role is not to be a 7-foot jobber, even though it sort of is. But you have to make something out of that because he's got that look.
Yeah.
So, and now you're going to see him team up with ELP, and they're clearly cycling down to, the strong tag titles aren't exactly top of the card stuff, but it'll be an establishing thing for both he and ELP, and maybe it'll be something fun, right? So, I when people say it's bad booking, all I'm hearing is it's the booking that you didn't want.
Right.
It's not necessarily bad. No one's looking at this objectively, including myself. Like my investment is in the long-term health of the story side of New Japan Pro Wrestling, because I think that's what's most interesting. So I look at this tournament and I think, well, I didn't have a ton to work with in my role with the company and with my role with the broadcast team. Like A Block, there's no history to run with, right? There's nothing to draw from. But so I have to, I'm a glass half full guy. So I'm going to look at what's the positive out of this. And the positive out of this is that they weren't ready to elevate one of the quote unquote Three Musketeers. And, Kiyomiya got geeked. And that's on Noah. That's not on New Japan. And Hikuleo was the last guy standing that wasn't Sonata. And he's a guy that he might disappear too. For all we know, he doesn't have a long run. This might have been a Jonah style run through the G1 to get yourself a nice little slot in the quarterfinals and get bounced by someone who's going to go on to win the tournament. So the long-term gain of all of that is, I think that's healthy booking, even if it's not perfect and it's not exactly what you're looking for, right? If they wanted to run this tournament with no progression for any of these younger guys, they would have run a 20-person tournament and they would have left them all out, citing the fact that they were all young and they just came back. They wanted to do this. This was very important to the long term and the forward-looking people in the New Japan offices.
Well, I've always been high on Hikuleo for his potential, but like you said, the clock is ticking, and it to me is just one of those situations where it's like, it's put up or shut up. You showed up, you're here, you got to deliver. I didn't feel like he delivered in this particular spot, and looking back in hindsight, I do think that it probably would have been better for them to have Kiyomiya in there, just because it's a bigger.
But then Kiyomiya ate a loss to a big Tetsuya Naito, and he still had and then he just had eaten a loss to Kazuchika Okada. Like, for all we know,
that's more palatable from a certain respect, because he's losing to the bigger stars.
It is, but you expect that to all go somewhere, and I don't think any of this. Everyone wants all this to go somewhere. I have a theory that kick to Okada's face and Okada going nuts on him at that show
was real.
Like, I mean, the kick was far too stiff. And we've never seen Okada that mad. So there's a big part of me that thinks that happened. Okada got pissed because he just got kicked in the dome.
Yeah.
And he went off on him in a way that was like storyline and in safe places. But I have this theory that Okada went at least a little off script, and people made this big thing out of it. And then, and he'd already been geeked at the crossover show, right? When was the Kiyomiya Okada match? Was that the Muto show?
Yeah, it's at the Muto
show.
Where
Okada just like murdered him. So he just murdered him again. And I don't clearly there was no plans to ever go back to that.
Well, part of it, when you talked about good booking versus bad booking and everything like that, I do agree with you. I think it's all relative to what you're looking for. But I do think that there is probably an aspect where it's like, all right, you're New Japan, you're handling someone else's top star, maybe for the sake of the fans, and then also for the sake of, like, people wanting to work with you guys, you give them a little. I'm not saying give them everything, put them in the finals, whatever. I do think it would have made a lot of sense to put him through. He's like the most established guy that wasn't Sonata in the group, and then have him lose to Naito. And I think the match would have been better, especially since I just don't think Hikuleo was ready for this spot on this night, because he was fumbling out there. But we'll agree to disagree. The match following that, Will Ospreay and David Finlay, was fantastic. I don't know if it reached the same lofty heights as the title match that they had last year, but I liked it better than their G1 match from last year. And seeing, David Finlay fully formed into this role, taking on Will Ospreay, I thought they had a really, really great encounter. And we started to even see David Finlay, utilizing a lot of cheating tactics in this match, because he's tried to beat Will straight up as, this new Bullet Club incarnation, and he hasn't been able to do it. And there was almost too many stakes at play here. So he kind of like delved into the trickster bag a little bit, and we were not used to actually seeing that from David Finlay at this point, really.
Yeah, he pulled out the stops, right? Like, he had been this kind of just bruiser who is just taking over and getting after people that way, but he clearly knew that he couldn't. Maybe Ospreay's his next big, that's his next big scalp.
His mountain.
Yeah, I mean, in this role, right? Because he got the one win over him in the G1 last year, but before that and since then, it doesn't feel like they've matched elevations. Like, Will is still on this trajectory, and even though Finley's in a much bigger spot now, there's some work to do there, and I think he's doing that work, and he's getting there. But yeah, I also agree, though. I think this match was good, like pretty good. It wasn't like it didn't like captivate me, but I didn't lose my attention, if that makes any sense.
Dave Meltzer gave 4 3/4, which I think is like a little out there, but
Well,
he loved it.
Dave's got a new Osprey bump.
Yeah, he loved. He
yeah.
does. He definitely has one.
I mean, Finley and Osprey is a great matchup. They have, I mean, every time they get in the ring together, like there's intensity, there's heat, there's a lot of energy, and it's clear these guys just genuinely, I think, like each other outside of the ring, and they give each other a lot, right?
I think he's Finley's best opponent in New Japan.
Yeah, I mean, I think Will Ospreay's everyone's best opponent in New Japan, though. So there's
an argument for that too.
Yeah, I mean, like maybe not everyone, but I'm looking at everyone who's in the G1 that he's faced, and I'm like, yeah, Zach, okay, Naito, yeah, we're gonna talk about that in a second. You know, like run down the line.
Who's your best opponent, Ishii or Ospreay?
Yeah, right. Are you an Ishii guy or are you an Ospreay guy? I mean, that's almost what it comes down to, because like everyone steps up against Naito, Tanahashi, and Okada. Yeah. So on, you know, besides that, you're either an Ishii guy or an Ospreay guy or both. And the ones who are both are the ones that are really gonna shine. So yeah, but I like this matchup. It's a little clunky when they're both heelish, you know, and I think Will's like really face leaning these days, but
right.
You know, I'd like to see them with a full on babyface and heel dynamic the other direction, because when we really saw them shine was when Will was truly playing full heel and Finley was this like super scrappy underdog.
Well, David Finley walked out initially with Coughlin and Gabe Kidd, and you know, yeah, they ended up with that. And Great O'Connor and Jeff Cobb came out to even up the score. And at a certain point, Cobb got involved. He got sent to the back, and that caused issues. And then later on, there was the ref bump, and you know, so there was a little bit of shenanigans, but still palatable. But ultimately,
it's like meaningful shenanigans, though.
Yeah.
Because it sort of ended up setting up what'll be the strong tag title program.
Essentially, yeah.
So at least there's that, or at least a part of that. So yeah, we'll see where that goes.
But Finley tried many, many times to get his finish, but ultimately was unable to secure that. And Will ended up beating him with the Stormbreaker for the 1-2-3. Following that match, we had Evil and Sonata. You know, I know it's a little bit of a wash, rinse, repeat from the night prior, but I got to tell you, I liked this match a lot less than I did with the Shingo. I was anticipating personally that Sonata, whoever he fought here, would go through. Mm-hmm. And I thought that what the plan was Okada beats him, and then that would set up the title match for later on. And then that would make it much easier for my projected winner, Naito, to beat Okada, because then it's like, well, Okada lost, but he's got this title shot secured down the line. And they didn't go that way, which actually in some ways this is probably more interesting than that is. But I don't know. I've never really loved Evil and Sonata matches just in general. And this one for me kind of felt flat. It suffered from a lot of the same supposed issues from the night prior, but with Sonata and him, they just didn't seem to gel. This was kind of all over the place. And then ultimately, you know, Evil beat Sonata. I didn't think the crowd was super into it. I didn't love this match necessarily.
Yeah, it was to me same with Evil and Sonata. Like I don't connect with that duo. I think people want there to be a lot more meat on the bones there because they tagged together for so long, but it's just not there. You know, they're fine opponents, but they don't have any sort of like emotional connection. Besides the fact they've wrestled 430 matches together. So like people connect them, and I think want that to be a more interesting match than it is. So yeah, same. I don't have a ton more to say about it because I don't want to go back on my Evil soapbox, but
the main event though was fantastic. Okada and Zach really turned up here, and I'd actually seen some of the reviews prior to this. I was a little bit spoiled, and I was like, you know, this match is going to be blow away. People are freaking out here. And then for the first 5 minutes, it was mainly Okada control segment. And I was like, like I'm not really getting into this match. But then like the last 5 to 6 minutes, it turned up so hot with all these crazy reversals and everything that I was just like, Oh man, Okada and Zach they've got a special kind of chemistry with one another. I really, really wanted Zack Sabre to win here,
Yeah.
just because he's a guy that I really am pushing to potentially like do well in a G1, go to a finals, or hold the big title at some point in time in the future. I know it doesn't seem likely that that is going to happen, but I want it to be the case. And so I wanted him to beat Okada so bad here. And I was like living and dying with him. And then when he ultimately got beat, I was a little deflated, but the match itself was fantastic. And yeah, Okada's really turned it up down the stretch here too, as well as Naito did.
Yeah, and there's a part of me that thought if Zach won, he was submitting Okada. Like that was what was going through my mind. Like he wasn't going to hit a Zach driver and pin him. Like he was going to submit him, and it was going to eventually be part of the fabric that brings us to Sabre versus Danielson. Kind of part of their story. Plus, maybe Okada, you build some sort of story there where he's able to be submitted because it has happened, twice. But I thought that would be an interesting kind of offshoot of what could happen there. But ultimately, I kind of figured that Okada was going to go through here. But I think I agree with you about where Zack Sabre Jr. sits kind of in the promotion, but I really see him as that guy that could absolutely go to a G1 final, like believably, and then have a really great match with whoever's on the other side, no matter who it is, especially someone at that level. And they could have that match in a G1 final, even if it's someone down the line, if it's someone like Ospreay, and they run back a ton of their stuff. And it's like what we saw earlier today, right? You saw a really good version, if not the best version, of Naito versus Okada. You could run back another one of those classic matchups as a G1 final at some point and do Ospreay versus Zack Sabre, or even Naito versus Zack Sabre. Some of these guys that he's got a ton of history with, or even Okada, if you want to get back to the Okada side of things. So Zack Sabre Jr. is going to be one of those guys who's always on the cusp. Maybe he gets one of those little runs. There was a part of me that thought they should have just given him a COVID run like they did with Shingo, because that is equally interesting. But I love what Zach's doing right now, and I love where his character's at. I love where the matches are at. I mean, I really do feel like he's on top of his game, and he's really he's filled out. He looks like a heavyweight. He's super believable. But he's still got the TV championship, and that I think is
Right.
really good for him too. And they didn't really set anything up throughout the tournament for that until the final night, which was a whole kind of out of left field thing. But yeah, of course this match was great. These are two of the best wrestlers in the world.
Well, they really delivered here, and that brings us to night 18. So the semifinal evening, we finally get to Ryogoku Koku Gugikan
Sumo Hall.
Sumo Hall. This was yesterday, August the 12th, reported attendance 6,579. There were 3 dark matches. We did not see them, but it was part of that Meat Challenge series where Oleg Boltin successfully defeated Ryohei Oiwa, Yuto Nakashima, and Oscar Luebe in subsequent matches to not only win the series and the challenge, but also secure a number 1 contendership spot against Zack Sabre Jr. for the NJPW World Television title. So that's pretty cool. On the undercard here, we had Hayata from Noah teaming up with Kaito Kiyomiya. They defeated Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Master Wato. And one thing, ever since he got ousted from the A block, Kevin Kelly's gone in kind of hard on Kaito Kiyomiya on commentary. It's been pretty noticeable.
I mean, he's in the first match every night, so he gets full energy.
Oh man, strong. After that, the strong style team of Minoru Suzuki and Ren Narita, they defeated Shota Umino, Tomoaki Hanma, 10 minutes and 18 seconds. There's a running story where Ren Narita coming out of the A block is sort of maybe not quite pushing to his full potential, and Minoru Suzuki is sort of noticing that and kind of challenging him to be more and to do better in the post-match comments. So that's kind of been a running story here on these undercard matches. Following that match, the Bullet Club team of Alex Coughlin, Chase Owens, David Finlay, Gabe Kidd, and Kenta Along with Geto, they defeated the Chaos team of Goto, Yano, Yo, Yoshihashi, along with Togi Makabe, 10 minutes, 48 seconds. Following that, the United Empire team of Okan, Hanari, and Cobb defeated the LIJ team of Bushi, Shingo, and Yota Tsuji, 10 minutes and 57 seconds. And then following that, Eddie Kingston, Tanahashi, Ryozuki Taguchi, and Tomohiro Ishii defeated the TMDK team of Kosei Fujita, Mikey Nichols, Shane Haste, and Zack Sabre Jr. And then your final undercard match, GOD's Hikuleo, Jado, Tamatonga, and Tangaloa teamed up with El Phantasmo to defeat Just Five Guys as Doki, Sonata, Taichi, Taka Michinoku, and Yoshinobu Kanemaru. Before we move into these top two matches, was there anything on the undercard worth noting that I missed here? I felt like there was a couple things that happened.
Nothing that doesn't really play out at the finals.
Right. I do. Oh, you know what? There was the thing with Bullet Club where Coughlin and Owens were standing tall over Chaos, over Goto and Yoshihashi holding their belts. Obviously, they're not going to be the next challengers, but it does seem like they're potentially setting up to be the challengers after the challengers down the stretch. That might be in line here, but sure. that remains to be seen.
After TMDK.
So for the semifinals, we had Kazuchika Okada. He defeated Evil with Dick Togo, 18 minutes and 8 seconds. And I enjoyed this match. I liked it a lot. Again, I didn't like it as much as I was into the match that he had in the block final evening with Shingo. But I thought they did a great job here with him and Okada. And the crowd on this night was so hot for this match, and they wanted Okada to win so badly.
I mean, the crowd on both the last two nights was vintage. I mean, like really felt like pre-pandemic New Japan crowd engagement.
Absolutely.
So, like, and that makes the Evil matches so much more palatable than Silence. I mean, like, I'm not going to, but there's a part of me that wants to go back and watch Evil when he won the title, to like just straight up Silence in Osaka-jo Hall. But either way, yeah, there was a lot less of the run-in stuff than the Shingo match, but the Shingo match was kind of like max capacity of like shenanigans. Right. But it is nice that whenever it's the Okada match, it does seem to come down a touch, at least. Okada he's not willing to make himself look like a dumbass. Yeah. So I think he probably just like vetoes anything that he can't, that he knows he could just like simply get around. So it is nice to see that kind of level of effort. These are the match types that I think people could stomach a little bit more frequently. But either way, yeah, it was good. It was a good semifinal match. Everyone wanted Okada to go through. Again, you're building that fear within people. How far are we going to go with Evil again, right? And it's the reactions that you see. I mean, like, people try to hide it in saying like, oh, I just don't think it's good for business or whatever. Like, right, get out of here. You're a fan, okay? You're a fan and you're enjoying this and you're reacting exactly the way people want you to react. Like, don't give me this X-Pac heat bullshit. Like, you're getting worked and that's okay. It's okay. And it's fun. And it's exactly what we're supposed to do. So I love it. And I love that Okada won here because I do want my G1 final to be a classically great pro wrestling match. I'm always going to want that for that particular match, but I can totally see in a world where semifinals exist. Think about these if they were the two block finals.
Yeah, right? Essentially.
I mean, and that's their slot, right? Think about these two matches like they were, if they were a 10-person block final that you kind of just like sporadically and randomly got there and it wasn't this, 8-person knockout round, people would have loved it. So, and I just think, once you simplify the tournament into a single elimination, people really understand what's going on and they start to freak out because they start to see a pretty clear path forward. And here was the Evil roadblock named Kazuchika Okada, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that with Evil, depending on how far they go, they've already gone all the way with him one time before. And
But that's the only reason you believe that they would go all the way with him now.
Right. And it's something where fans are like, damn it, please don't go back there. Please don't do it.
So back to my point. So 2020, even though I don't think this was the intention, everything that happened in 2020 was actually about 2023. Right? It was about when crowds came back and could really cheer and really get into this stuff and get heated. And honestly, they were with it for at least Evil's last three matches really were hot. Even the Sonata match, and we know Sonata's, crowd response isn't exactly
right
at the loudest, decibels. So the last three Evil matches were exactly what you could want. It's way more fun watching from home too, when the crowd's going nuts, because you're laughing at them. You're like, y'all, like, you're going nuts about this Evil dude. It's fun. It's fun for everyone. And I think it's important to remember that, and not to try to hide behind like some fake business metrics that you probably don't really know, because this company is privately run in Japan.
Now, I don't know that, that ultimately they're ever going to go with Evil again. I don't know that they're ever going to do that. But hypothetically, if they did, that might be the point where I'm like, this is a mistake.
That's where I would have feelings.
But because they've done it one time in the past, it kind of like establishes for me that, that this is something that's always going to, it's always going to be possible. The threat that it's always going to be there, and it's fine.
But they had to do that, so this all mattered.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, no matter when they heat Evil up, because they did that, everyone's going to be like, uh-oh, are we doing it again? And then you get, hours upon hours of audio content, including your own.
Now, one thing I did like with Okada is essentially, like you mentioned, he's not willing to make himself necessarily look bad. This was almost like Hoganism to a certain degree, because they did all the run-ins and then he beat all of them.
He just drop kicked them all, and
then he won. But the crowd loved it, so it was the right time and the right stage to do something like that.
Evil did hit Everything Is Evil.
He did,
and the air came out of that building when he hit that. The air, I mean, that building was deflated, because people don't kick out of that finisher. People really don't kick out of most finishers in New Japan. If you hit them clean, right? There's the Wacky Destino, and there's the short arm Rainmaker, and everyone's got like a subpar version of their finisher. Evil's, apparently, and what I didn't catch when it happened, he did this one with his left side. So it was like, so normally he's got the right arm around them, and he does the move with his right leg. He did this one from his left. So I guess the left side, Everything Is Evil, is the weaker version, because then Okada kicked out. But I didn't know that, and I didn't really notice that, because it's kind of an odd thing to notice. It was like his lucha version. And so when Okada kicked out, I mean, that was the moment of the match for me where I was like, I gasped. I was like, okay, thank God, because I was like, oh God, they are gonna go with him, that maybe the G1 finals, where that's my level of being like, that's one step too far. Like, you saved the title, I'm a G1 guy, right? So like, oh man, I was like, oh no, don't give me that in the final, even if I really am certain he's not gonna win. So, but yeah, he hit his finish, and then Okada, he's the best, right? 2.99999, right? Like, and just barely lifting the elbow or the shoulder up. And then from there, it was all Okada. And, once he kicked out of that, I knew it was his match to have.
Yep. So Okada ends up winning 18 minutes and 8 seconds, securing his spot in the finals and a potential berth to three-peat this tournament. And then your main event of the evening, Tetsuya Naito defeats Will Ospreay along with Great-O-Khan, Hanari, and Jeff Cobb. 29 minutes, 58 seconds. And boy, oh boy, this was, for me, the best match of the tournament, and my favorite match Naito and Will Ospreay have ever had against one another. I was blown away at this match.
This it's my favorite Tetsuya Naito match of all time. and there might be some recency bias happening in my brain, but I'm willing to accept that. I thought it was an incredible match. The finish was a display of selflessness and of willingness to do whatever it takes to give, the fans and New Japan exactly what they were expecting. And I thought that was so high level. I mean, it was just it was high level from a kayfabe perspective. It was high level from an insider perspective, and you kind of got to see, how much this means to these humans, right? Not necessarily their characters, but this performance meant a lot to both of these humans, and they absolutely crushed it. And I'm not a star rater. I think I've talked about that on this show. Like, that's not how I look at, or that's not how I consume wrestling, mostly because I'm busy consuming the next show while I'm watching this show. But I don't know. I know Ospreay and Omega were really, really great matches for me and for my enjoyment of wrestling. This gave them both a run for their money. So I'm not sure exactly where this will land once I start voting in whatever, match of the years, but it's on the very short list. I might need to rewatch and take my feelings out of it, in the sense of, like, I love the G1, and the G1 is something that I put a lot of time and effort into, but man, if this wasn't one of my favorite matches of all time, like, it was so good. And this year's been so good for high level matches. And the safety issues and the long-term health of the wrestler issues and things like that, like, there's certainly conversation to be had there. I don't know that I'm qualified to have that conversation, but just seeing them get through whatever the situation was, Naito went the next night, so and wrestled and looked fine. So, like, I have to believe that there's, that he wasn't totally out. But it was very interesting to watch happen, and to get a little peek under the hood as to how it all happens. And I thought the commentary team, they did a masterful job covering for some of the things you might have been hearing while we were going through that finish. But yeah, I mean, just two dudes at the top of their game, and Will Ospreay just giving everything he can to make sure that this was, one of the matches of the tournament. And, again, my favorite Naito match ever, potentially my favorite match of this year.
Yeah, I'm not willing to go quite as high and say it's my favorite Naito match of all time. I think that would probably be reserved for, like, one of those
2016, 2017 G1s.
Yeah, those Kenny Omega matches.
The Kenny Omega matches, yeah.
But this is in that conversation, and I wouldn't fault anybody else who feels that way, because I'm 5 stars on this, and I very rarely, I know you don't give stars, but I do. And
yeah, I don't
rarely.
I don't hear you throw 5s very frequently. So,
like, almost never.
I think what got me on this one compared to the Naito Omega matches was that this one I watched live. Oh. Like, I was up and watching this. I watched the last, 4 or 5 shows, like, totally live. And so that was, so I was, like, really engaged with it. So I think that helped put it over that edge for me.
In either case, this was just incredible. And there was something that took place down the stretch, and it seems like there was a series of hook kicks that were coming from Ospreay to Naito, and at some point one of those must have connected extremely strong and just knocked Naito loopy. If it wasn't that, then there was a point later where he went for maybe a forearm, or maybe he was getting ready to set up for a Destino, but he got super kicked straight on in the face there. And I actually thought he might have already been out before that, but if he wasn't before that, then he definitely was there. And it was kind of unclear at this point what was happening, whether the match was starting to kind of take a turn for maybe Naito was getting hurt. And the thing with it is, when you're watching it, the drama is so high, the crowd is so into it. And like you mentioned, Kevin Kelly and Chris Charlton are doing a great job kind of covering for some of the stuff that's there going on there. But if this guy wasn't hurt, they were either doing the greatest sell job that I've ever seen for somebody in a match or he was legitimately knocked loopy, because there starts to be these moments of kind of wobbling down the stretch. And normally I'm a little bit critical of some botches and things like that, but the match had been so epic up to this point that this almost kind of like fed into the brutality and the grittiness of the match that had already, preceded it. And then ultimately, I think like Ospreay down the road, because he had to lose, he essentially Destinos himself. He hoists Naito over his own head and gives himself the Destino, because I don't think Naito could give him the Destino at that point anymore.
No.
And he pretty much had to beat himself.
He looked like he was wrestling Yoshioka. Like,
it was
I rewatched that finish 3 or 4 times because I was just fascinated by it. Also, it was even I don't know if it added to it or took away from it, but either way, it was great. But it's compelling.
Yeah,
if one way or another, it's compelling.
The drama was super high here.
Yeah, and the building was. We haven't heard a building like that since 2019.
And one thing we hadn't made,
maybe New Beginning 2020 with Kenta and Naito. Like maybe that was the last time we heard a building like that, but it's never that if it's not in Ryogoku. That building when it's hot is insane, and that added so much to this match for me too.
Well, we also hadn't made mention of the fact that up until this point, Naito had never beaten Ospreay 1-on-1 in a singles match. So that's also kind of like playing into this as well. And there's a lot of really great moments in this match. One point where Naito goes to the top, tries to give a top rope poison Rana to Ospreay. Ospreay literally lands on his feet all the way through, which was just outstanding. And then it kind of became a battle of like hook kicks and hidden blades from Ospreay, and then the back elbows from Naito, and these guys started just slugging each other and killing one another. And yeah, this was just outstanding, incredible. And it took 3 Destinos from Naito for him to finally put away Ospreay. So just incredible. One of my favorite matches of the entire year, and I think it is on that short list for match of the year contenders. That's going to take us into the final night, which happened earlier today from Ryogoku Sumo Hall. The attendance, 8,283. And quite a few things happened on this show. In the opening match, we had Kaito Kiyomiya and Ryohei Oiwa. They defeated Oscar Luebe and Toru Yano. One bit of news that I noticed, I didn't watch the backstage comments, but I saw that Kiyomiya seemed to be inviting Oiwa to potentially show up in Noah.
Yeah, that seems to be the plan.
So, that's one thing I will throw out there. You mentioned, I don't know if there's going to be continued stuff between them, but there's at least enough for them to bring Oiwa over, at least for some period of time.
I mean, what's funny about that is that Oiwa is like significantly bigger than Kiyomiya. Like he's a big dude. He looks way more filled out. Clearly not quite as skilled, but it is a kind of funny look.
They teamed together all throughout the tournament, seemed to have issues putting it together, but finally on the final night, they were able to secure victory here, which was great for them. Following that, we had 8-man tag team match. Master Wato, Shota Umino, Tomoaki Hama, and Yuji Nagata defeated the Strong Style trio along with Yuto Nakashima, 8 minutes and 41 seconds. And we had some stories coming out of this where it seemed like post-match, not only throughout the match did we have a lot of heated interactions between Ren Narita and Shota Umino, but then it kind of spilled over to where Nagata and Wato were getting involved with the Strong Style trio, who are, are they? No, they're not the current reigning. I kept thinking that they're 6-man tag team champions. They're not. But at the end of the match, we still got, like a face-off and all of them brawling. And it seems like that might be leading to a 6-man tag team match regardless.
Yeah, I would imagine it will. That does seem to be the way. They're also going to run separate singles matches, sort of connecting those two groups too.
Yeah, we've seen Suzuki and Nagata a million times in the past, so that's like old country beef. And then Desperado and Watto are both kind of looking for something to do in the meantime while, trying to further their campaigns in the junior
Probably,
division.
maybe to establish a home promotion junior heavyweight title challenger, because right
Yeah.
now everyone that could challenge Hiromu or would likely challenge Hiromu is from different companies.
Also, one thing I want to point out, Yuto Nakashima, boy, has he beefed up. Holy
He's beefy.
crap.
He's a big boy now.
Yeah, he's big. So, but that was really great. Following that, we had another 8-man tag team match. Tenkoji teaming up with Tiger Mask and Togi Makabe defeated Eddie Kingston, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Tomohiro Ishii, and Yo. Didn't have any big story elements that I saw here, but the big thing, Eddie Kingston's run in New Japan seems to be done for the time being, which we've had a great time. I especially loved a couple nights ago at the post match where he celebrated with Tanahashi, and then there's that famous picture of him hugging a stoic Ishii.
Yeah. It's like emotional Eddie just trying to hold on to
it. Following that, the TMDK team of Kosei Fujita, Mikey Nichols, Shane Haste, and Zack Sabre Jr. defeated the Chaos team of Goto, Yoshihashi, Oleg Boltin, and Ryozuki Taguchi. Some big pieces of news coming out of that. They announced that Kosei Fujita is no longer going to be considered a young lion coming out of this match. So that's big news. Also, Mikey Nichols and Shane Haste were the ones that secured the victory over Goto and Yoshihashi in this match. I don't remember who pinned who. I think Goto lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems to be what my brain remembers. I could be wrong, though. I don't have the falls in front of me.
Regardless, it sets up TMDK as being the number one contenders for the IWGP heavyweight tag team titles moving forward. And then we got our first glimpses of Zack Sabre Jr. and Oleg Boltin across from one another, setting up Oleg Boltin as the number one contender for the world television title.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. Or, they said they wanted it to be a youth title. They got a youth challenger.
It'll be fun. Whatever it'll be fun. I hope that they don't even tease a time limit, but let's have a good time with it.
Following that, El Phantasmo and Hikuleo, Jado, Tamatonga, Tangaloa defeated the Bull Club team of Coughlin, Owens, David Finlay, Gabe Kidd, and Kenta. And coming out of that match, it seemed to be that El Phantasmo and Hikuleo are being established as the next challengers for the strong openweight tag team titles, as well as looks like we're getting a rematch between David Finlay and Tamatonga for the never openweight title.
Yeah, I mean those were all very clear directions that were coming out of this, and I think that there is as always, the G1 final is this big. It's not really a blow off for anything except for the tournament. It's this big table setting show for everything else. So, and honestly, the tournament sets the table for Wrestle Kingdom too.
Mm-hmm.
So it is. People go back and forth on whether or not Dominion or the G1 final is like the second biggest show of the year. I don't really have an opinion because I think they're totally different shows. I think, Dominion's always finalizing a lot of different things, and the G1 is almost always just starting everything, right? You're finishing up the tournament, but that's all so crisp and clear, and there's purpose behind it. There doesn't need to be a lot of conflict that goes into the G1. It's a established tournament that people want to win. That seems good enough, right? So coming out of that and going into the G1 final show, it's all set up for future stuff. So that's why these matchups were actually so kind of intriguing. And this show, even though it's all 8-man tag, one 10-man tag and a bunch of 8-man tags, mostly, there were 56 wrestlers on this card. Like almost all 56 came out with something to do after here. It was, when you talk about Russo-esque booking, that was one of the things he actually did do really well, is he always had everyone had like a thread. And that was kind of what this show led to. I mean, very few wrestlers on this show, as I'm looking at the results, didn't come out of it with something to do later.
Absolutely. Following that match, I got lost here. Let me see. We had another tag team match. It was the team of LIJ, Bushi, Hiromu, Shingo, and Yota Tsuji. They defeated the United Empire team of Great Khan, Hanare, Jeff Cobb, and Will Ospreay 10 minutes and 50 seconds. And the big surprise turn here was that Yota Tsuji got a clean pinfall victory over the current reigning champion Will Ospreay. And I'm not sure exactly what championship he holds, because up until now he was the IWGP US Heavyweight Championship. But the previous evening he unveiled in the post-match comments that he has a new title belt, and it's the IWGP United Kingdom Heavyweight title, and that's the belt that he's proclaiming to hold. I don't know if that's an official change, or if, I don't know if this is Lance Stormism when he was the US champion and he put the Canadian, flag over it. I don't know.
It's a pretty real belt.
It looks better than the one they had.
Well, the US title had seen better days. It was clearly on its last legs, but you can obviously get a new, physical belt made. But it looks pretty legit. That's a pretty big investment to make. So, but I think even potentially by the time people hear this, there will be a show probably announced. It's happening in the United Kingdom. That seems to be what everyone's alluding to in various places. So I have to wonder if, and there's also just the biggest pro wrestling show of all time happening in the United Kingdom coming up soon. So I have to wonder if Ospreay is working with the company to kind of leverage some opportunity here. So even if they don't change the name of the title, or even if they do, I think that leaves Rev Pro in a weird spot.
I thought about that, yeah.
Because Rev Pro is one of their best partners. So,
I mean,
you can't have multiple champions of the British.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be one thing if, they had another. I mean, it's so specific because the Rev Pro title is the undisputed British heavyweight championship. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, Ospreay has a IWGP UK title, and that's got to be, seen as the more lofty title. So it is a little strange, considering his history with that company.
I have a theory, and it's out here. No one can see me, but it's way out in left field. Okay. So Ospreay's the US champion, right?
Well, maybe.
Ospreay has been the US champion, right? The United States, right?
Yeah.
Ospreay gets this belt made and says, "No, I'm the UK champion," right? Belt looks almost the same, different flag, says a different thing. Good looking belt, right? For as long as Ospreay is holding it, maybe it's the UK championship. No problem. Whatever. Lance Stormism. I totally think that that's a route you could go here. But then once somebody beats him, maybe someone who looks like a really famous Intercontinental champion of times before, if he beats him and holds both belts and it's like US, UK, Intercontinental, and Shota Umino brings back the Intercontinental title, that could be a cool, and the Shota and Will thing, and Shota looks like Tanahashi. Tanahashi was a big time Intercontinental champion. Somehow this could be a long-term play to get the IC title back and to really babyface Shota Umino, because bringing back the IC title would be like when Cody did it in WWE.
See, when you said that somebody looked like champion of yesteryear, I thought you were talking about Tsuji looking like Nakamura. I was like, oh yeah, I can get on with that.
Oh, sure. He could do it too. That's fine too.
I guess this means that somebody needs to actually go and pick up that US title and actually carry that around for the time being as well.
Somehow, and bring them back together and turn that into the Intercontinental instead of having a US or a UK belt. I think that's probably a long shot. This is probably not that deep when it comes down to it. And maybe they are just trying to leverage, both either maybe the Wembley show or, I think by the time people hear this, Royal Quest is probably announced. And I think that's probably happening in October when it has happened in the past. So, there's a chance though that it's something interesting like that to get that white strap back.
Maybe
fun.
But I do think that there's definitely something there where you mentioned that they're going to be leveraging potentially the Wembley show and
Sure.
some of the other dates that they have going in the UK around that time. And I mean, it doesn't get defended in the US anyways very
No,
often,
it
so it's
doesn't really
always
matter. Yeah.
yeah. But I am glad that they've got a cleaner looking title. Going back to the Suji thing though, I had no anticipation he was beating
No,
Will here. Like
no,
when I saw them in the ring together, I was like, okay, like this is awesome.
this is
This
fun. Yeah.
this is the cool thing you get with these undercards. You get to see these young guys with their first time interactions with the big stars that they're probably going to feud with down the road. That's great. And then I fully expected Ospreay to just beat him, and I'm like, well, I mean, I wasn't thinking too much about it. I'm like, yeah, I guess you have other like Bushi's there who could take the pinfall, but maybe it's time for Suji to just do the honors. And then suddenly, like spear, and I'm like, oh my god, he won. I was like, why didn't I think of this? Like, so it seems like he's going to be the next challenger for the U.S. title or the UK title. So
Right.
that's
And
pretty awesome.
I think that's your main event for Royal Quest.
That's awesome. And then
And Suji just came back from his
Exactly.
excursion in Rev Pro. People love him there, right? Like that's as clean and clear as it gets.
Yeah.
And then you add in this whole UK title thing, which I just think is fascinating, and I wonder if it is a long-term play towards something.
I mean, I wonder if like the Rev Pro title somehow gets disputed against this at some
Yeah,
point.
right. Well, and obviously that's a play you can make, but I know that relationship's still really strong, and
Yeah.
Rev Pro is not showing any signs of letting up. So I do think that is an interesting move, but also I know obviously like Will is tight with the Rev Pro guys. Like I bet that they've already talked this through and made sure that no one's going to lose anything out of it.
Well, in either case, that takes us to the semi-main event, which was an 8-man tag team match. We had the House of Tortures, Dick Togo, Evil Show, and Yujiro Takahashi. They defeated just 5 guys: Doki, Sonata, Taichi, and Yoshinobu Kanemaru, and beat them in 10 minutes, 25 seconds. A lot of cheating here, but the post-match angle was the main thing where not only did Show attack Taichi and make his intentions for the KOPW title known, but Sonata was beat down and handcuffed to the ring ropes and made to look like a fool by the House of Torture. And even on commentary, Chris Charlton's been pretty critical of Sonata and his loss to Evil. And Evil had them read out a statement about how Sonata was not fit to be champion and essentially needed to hand over the title to Evil. And Sonata, some of his backstage comments were also kind of telling, where he mentioned like, if I can't beat this guy, maybe I shouldn't be at this level, sort of thing. So it does seem that Evil's well on his way to getting the next title shot against Sonata. Chris, what do you think of all this?
I mean, it's pretty much what I expected. I expected them to set up Evil and Sonata. I didn't expect them to set up Show and Taichi, but whatever. I just can only imagine the stipulation that's going to come with that, but it's all, Show. So the way people feel about Evil, just like watching him and like being annoyed by it, is how I feel watching Show these days. Like I can't deal with the funny faces. Like I just want him to be better I want him to execute this role better. So Taichi's been awesome though. So put him in there with anyone. I think we're going to end up having a good time, but I did expect to see the Evil Sonata thing. It's so obvious. It also kind of ties through to, Sonata exercising all of his demons and all of the his previous life, right? His previous time with LIJ. He's pretty much got to go through everyone that's meant something to him in that time frame, and Evil is included in that. So, I hate to see the stupid handcuffs and Sonata being like stretched out and stuck on the ropes. And, part of me wonders if that was in one way or another going to lead to whatever stipulation Taichi and Show do, because they've done handcuff stuff for the KOPW before. So, ultimately it was about what I expected it to be, and it set up exactly what I figured it would.
Yeah, personally, not overly enthusiastic at the prospects of an Evil Sonata destruction main event. But it is what it is. That's what's happening. So a very eventful undercard on the G1 final evening, which brings us to the main event. And 34 minutes, 18 seconds, Tetsuya Naito defeats Kazuchika Okada to become your G1 Climax 2023 champion. And what a match this was. Just really, really, really outstanding. I'm close to 5, maybe 5 on this as well, but I still think I liked the Ospreay Naito match a smidge better, but this isn't far off. And for me, this is my favorite Naito Okada match ever between these two, and that's including the third meeting they had in the Tokyo Dome, and includes their anniversary show from 2012.
Yeah, same. I think, I don't know. There's something about the Tokyo Dome is a special place, but there's something even more special about watching New Japan Pro Wrestling in Ryogoku.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys in that spot in the G1 final for me, right? And I always talk about it a lot, but the G1 is if I fall out of doing what I do for and with New Japan Pro Wrestling, I'm still going to check in on the G1 every year. Like, I can promise that. I think it's the coolest thing that happens in pro wrestling. It can be one little month of self-contained content, or it can be this thing that means something both to the past and the future of the company. If you're consuming it, however you want to consume it, you can drop in for the G1 every year, and it's kind of like dropping in between Rumble and Mania and WWE. Right? Like it has that sort of vibe about it where like you can definitely just parachute in for the whole tournament. So to put these guys in that space after, Josh, I'm sure you feel this, right? After 4 or whatever, 3 G1 tournaments that were with clap crowds or smaller rosters, or people can't get there, or guys that are important just aren't showing up. Like, we finally had that moment where like this, we've talked a lot about like, New Japan's back, right?
Yeah.
This felt like New Japan is back and at 100%. We're not back to 90%. We're not back to, even 85 or 60 or whatever it's been. It's back. It's exactly what you want it to be. There are going to be things that you don't enjoy about it the same way there always has been, but I think in some sense, they put these dudes in this match to show the world that New Japan still has what they used to have, but we also have a lot of different things going forward too. And I think that that's a fine line, right? It's a fine line to toe, but the match was perfect. I mean, it was about as close to perfect as you could get. And again, Naito showed up and was exactly what you would want him to be in this position. There's so many people that are saying, like, on Twitter or whatever, like, I posted that this was like the 4th longest G1 match of all time. 2 of those other 3 that were longer, you felt it. Like, you knew those were long matches, right? This one, like, the 20-minute call came and I was like, oh, like, it's been like, we're at 20, like, but just enough had happened and the pace was just right. And I don't know, there's a lot of little things that these guys did just right that you'd have to really dissect it to figure out exactly what it was. But I mean, you can't go wrong with putting these 2 in the ring, but this does feel like Tanahashi in 2018.
Yeah.
Like, it feels exactly to me like Tanahashi in 2018. I hate to call it like a dead cat bounce, because it's not quite that, but it's this one little return to former glory. And, ironically, they're days apart in age from when Tanahashi won the championship. Tanahashi was 15,247 days old when he won that G1, and Naito is 15,027 days old. So they're basically the exact same age, but this definitely feels like Naito's 2018 Tanahashi run, when he reminds you who the fuck he is. But it's kind of very potentially the last time he gets to remind you of that, because 41 ain't young. But again, he showed up better than I thought he would after getting his bell rung against Ospreay. And these guys they're so good. And anytime Okada loses, I almost give him all the credit for how the match rolls, because he, without looking like it, he gives a lot.
Yeah.
Just incredible stuff.
There was so much going into this. And I concur. You hit the nail on the head with a lot of the things you brought up there, Chris. I loved the video package presentation. New Japan always has great video packages, but this one was pretty lengthy, and it really like set the stage for everything that had gone on through this tournament to get these guys to where they were. And then, yeah, it does feel in many ways like that 2018 tournament for Naito, where it's like it's a return to former glory for him, and a lot of people didn't necessarily expect him to be here. We on this show, I think me and Jeremy, going back to like March, have been predicting a Naito tournament win, but we didn't know for sure that was going to be the case. But ultimately, here we are. But the story was really interesting because these two guys have a lot of matches with one another. I think Okada's like 7 to Naito 6 going into this match. So that's a nice little wrinkle, because this kind of ties up their series all time now. Aside from that, though, because they've already done multiple Tokyo Domes, they've done other big shows, they've had matches in the G1, but they've never done a G1 final against one another. And so it's like that last big match that you can do between these guys that still has that cachet, and it's never been done before sort of feel to it. And then there is the story where going into the match, Okada not only would have won his 5th all-time G1, but his 3rd in a row. And there's still that aspect where it's like, okay, they love to do first-time things with guys, especially like Okada, who is, unmistakably the ace of the company. And it's like, if you're not going to do the three-peat at like now, it's never going to happen for the guy. So if it was ever going to happen, this is the time to do it. And that was kind of looming over the head of Naito, with this sort of feeling like his last hurrah. Plus, he got his bell rung the night before. And like, you're kind of wondering, like, how's he going to get through this match? Like, he wasn't looking so great against Ospreay. And then finally, the crowd. When you say we're back, like, yeah, we've had some great shows where me and Jeremy have come on and been like, man, this crowd was really live. They were really hyped. This was great. But there's been no matches in years where the crowd was just all consuming, invested in somebody. And as soon as the match started, it was just like, Naito. Naito. And I was like, oh my God. Like,
yeah. Especially against Okada. It's like, I was like, oh, like, we're doing this. Like, we're doing the like Naito groundswell, and it's happening in front of our eyes. And then Okada leaned into it. Like, to his credit, he leaned 100% into it. And again, that's what I mean when I say, like, this man gives, even though you don't really see it, right? You see guys like Will Ospreay give. You don't necessarily see Okada look like he's giving, but it's all happening. It's like they didn't stop chanting until
almost the whole match.
Until they left. They were probably out on the streets of Tokyo still doing it. Like, it was crazy. It was intense. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Like that much intensity for that long. It's like all the people that showed up to Ryogoku were like people that hadn't gone to Corkins or haven't gone to anything since they opened up vocal cheering again. And they were like, let's do this. Let's chant Naito all freaking night. And man, it felt good. It felt good to watch.
I know earlier in the show you said for me, work rate is like one of the most important things. And that is almost the case. But the most important thing for me is atmosphere. I can be won over by a match by just the crowd more so than anything else.
That's me too, right? Because the crowd's telling me whether it's good.
Yeah.
Right. And like, because I don't analyze it the same way you guys do, in the same way that some people do, where it's more about the physicality and how good it looks and right? Like, I don't do that. I'm all vibes. So like, and sometimes, through the pandemic, I found really good ways to figure out the vibes, even though the vibes weren't really vibing. Like this match, the Ospreay match, I mean, both Knights and Ryogoku, if you've got the time, watch them all the way through, and it's this swell all the way up to these big moments for Tetsuya Naito. And I'm not a Naito guy either, right? I know we've talked about this.
I'm not either.
I don't think you are either, right? But like, holy shit, I was today.
Oh,
like,
I wanted him to beat. I did not want to see Okada win for
yeah,
the third year in a row.
But you can't rule it out.
No, like, you can't. You can't.
So, and like it was tremendous stuff.
For me, like early projections, I know it's so early, but like getting into Wrestle Kingdom season, like I'm seeing Okada, Danielson. I'm seeing like probably Ospreay, Kenny again. And so with all that happen, and if not that, Ospreay's doing something.
You want him to just run back Forbidden Door in the Tokyo Dome?
Yeah. So then
you're like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So with all of that, I'm like, I think it's going to be Naito and Sonata. And if it's, the alternative, it's like, okay, Okada wins. Then you got Evil and Sonata. Like, this doesn't work for me. I do not want to see like Okada win. I love Okada. I really do. But I did not want to see him. Plus, like,
he has so much else to do. That's where I was at. It could be Kiyomiya, I guess. It could be Danielson. It could be someone like Moxley. It could be, I don't know. Let's get Kenny Omega. Like there's so many things. Like Okada could do a billion different things. Okada's your secret weapon that you can just you can announce a match and you've got a match and it's fine, right? Like so. There's enough else for him to do that if you thought about it long enough, you knew he probably wasn't winning the G1, but it's still Kazuchika Okada, and it's still the Tokyo Dome.
I've just seen him break Naito's heart too many times.
Yes. Well,
and I've seen like Naito, apart from him, have his heart broken and his fans' hearts broken too many times. I'm like, dude, let's not do this again. Like
so I was gonna say
this guy's got to win.
So. Naito and Okada, dating all the way back to 2007, they've traded wins, except for one time. One of these guys won back-to-back matches, and it was the time that everyone, quote-unquote, knew Naito was going to win in 2018, and Naito obviously did not win that. That's the only time that someone in this series has won 2 matches in a row. So like that, but that was the heartbreak that we were all ready for in the G1 final. And then you were going to look at it and say, well, what the hell's Naito doing then?
What was incredible about the match was how they told a really basic story. Like they did the basic chain wrestling and then Okada took over, then Naito took over, but then Okada took over, then Naito took over. Very up, down, back and forth. But what was a little different here was in the early iterations of their control segments, they kept trying to do the things that they're typically known to do in terms of their maneuvers, but they just kept countering each other because they've wrestled each other so many times. They know when they're going to go for their signatures. They know how they're going to do it. And so they kept stopping the other one from doing their big spots, whether that was like, I don't know the names of all, but they have these predetermined things that they do, and they didn't get to totally do them. And then in the second half of the match, they upped the intensity, and they ended up going back and doing all those same things, but getting it the second time. And that kind of added to the intensity there. And there's a point where I was like, holy shit, Okada's kicking the fuck out of Naito. And I was like, damn, he's really beating his ass. But then Naito started doing all this neck offense, which going back to their first match in 2012, that's his MO. He always attacks the neck, but the ways he was doing it in this match were so different from what he traditionally does against Okada. It was not old hat, and he was modifying a lot of his moves to specifically target the neck. And I'm like, damn, like this is vicious looking. And then down the stretch, they're just bashing each other and they're going into the strike exchanges, and I'm like, holy fuck, like they're hitting each other hard, like real hard. And there's like one point where like Okada's on the ground and he's like more, and like Naito starts kicking him in the face and giving him elbows, and I'm like, oh, this is awesome. But then down the stretch, you just kind of know that if this dude Naito eats a Rainmaker, he's done. And he ate variations of the Rainmaker,
short arm and
the spinning, but he never took a full on Rainmaker, but he kept going for the Destino, and
Okada had all those. I mean, Cobra Flosion or the landslide. Like, he has so many, like, on the show. It's like Okada has collected all these moves and started to establish them for this match.
Yeah.
He did, because Okada did the Cobra Flosion the whole tour. He did it as part of his setup, and he would do the landslide. So, like, all these things that require the dude to get up on your shoulder, he was doing them and establishing them as part of his moveset. And honestly, they came in handy here then too. He reversed a bunch of Destino attempts.
He reversed the Destino. And then there was a point where he lays out Naito. And this plays into what happened the previous night, where there was a point where Naito was almost counted out in the first match with Ospreay. And they very rarely do 10 counts in New Japan. But going back to like the classic, like, ages of New Japan, that was very common to see those types of finishes teased, and I haven't seen one of those in a long time. And they teased that the first night. The guy was obviously very loopy, so they incorporate that into the inner workings of this match, and they do a near count again where he's almost counted out. And I'm like, holy fuck, like, this is. And then
it also kind of went back to the Danielson match with Okada.
Yeah,
with Danielson having his whole situation, right? Like, Okada is like almost knocking dudes out now. Like, that's part of his bit. So big play on a couple of different things there. I thought that was actually really interesting.
Naito got the big giant swinging DDT that he's been beating everybody with in the tournament. Trying to get a pinfall off that was unsuccessful. Okada did the Okada sit down, pin, and he almost went off of that. Like, there's a lot of really great near falls off both guys. And then Naito ended up hitting the Northern Lights bomb. He went to the top and went for what's his top rope move that he hardly ever goes for?
The Stardust Press.
He goes for a Stardust Press.
And of course he does, right? Because we're all thinking about Heartbreak.
And it plays into all the matches they've had in the past. And of course he misses it. I'm like, oh my God. Like, the drama is so high in this. And
and Kevin and Chris are yelling like, no, like anything but that.
Okada blocks a Destino at one point, then he cradles out of another, and then he goes for Rainmaker. Naito cradles out of that, and then suddenly he hits a fucking Destino, like, out of nowhere, and you're like, oh my God. Okada kicks out of it, and there's a second Destino countered into a Cobra Flosion. Like, there's just back and forth, and finally Naito hits a Destino, picks him up, hits a second Destino, and after that second one, I was like, oh my God, finally, he fucking did it. Like, because I thought it was so back and forth. And he picks up the 1, 2, 3, and the crowd just erupts. Like, the crowd erupts, LIJ comes out, confetti, the flag, trophy. Naito gets to do the go home, the roll call, and storybook ending to a really great G1.
It was a really good tournament.
It was a great tournament.
It was a really good tournament. And I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people about how they feel about this tournament, because I'm just so curious about the feedback that the product gets. And I like to engage with people about that. And in the middle there, we weren't sure how it was going to play out, but I don't know. It's like in a traditional G1, or what has become a traditional G1. You always say, like, well, wait till those block nights. Wait till those last couple of nights of block and the final before you analyze anything.
Mm-hmm.
With this year, you kind of had to wait until those last 7 nights before you really knew how you felt about the tournament. And that's a lot of great shows.
Yeah.
Like all the block final nights, which I think were for my money, that those were the best paced nights of the tour, right? Those and the quarterfinal nights, right? Because you've got 4 big tournament matches, and then you've got some undercard stuff. It's just enough that those 4 matches can get all your intensity and all your attention. So as like full whole cards, I think those like just felt the best to me, was all those block final nights, and then the quarters being kind of the peak of that. But then, a traditional block final night only has 1 or 2 meaningful matches, and then you got your final, right? So the last 7 nights really kind of expanded those high stakes nights. And I don't think they could do this size tournament where every block is segregated unless you stretch it out to being 2 months long. I actually think the tournament was scheduled really well for what they wanted to do. I thought it was really neat. And I think, how they laid out the blocks ended up being exactly how I thought they had intended, right? Where A and B was really the fresh and really new stuff and all the character development and growth, and C and D, all those nights were like basically a bunch of matches that you've seen a couple times, but it reminds you what the G1 is.
They were able to take an exponentially greater amount of matches and still fit it into the 19-night schedule format.
Right.
And do that in a way to where, generally speaking, you were just getting about 4 shows per week. We've actually had tournaments where you've had way more tournament nights, jam-packed into a certain format. So it was paced really well. Obviously, one thing me and Jeremy noticed right away was like those early nights where you're getting 8 tournament matches. It was like, damn, why is this like we're getting less nights, but it feels like we're watching more? And it's like, oh, because we are. There's 8, matches each night. But by and large, I thought they did a great job. I do think there's some takeaways, some things that we learned, positive and negative. I mean, one of the things people used to love about the G1 is when you had the 20-man format, with the way that the format was stacked and everything, you'd have those classic, nights where you'd have maybe from a work rate perspective, the better evenings, the more classic nights. And I think we're finding out so far that this particular format, maybe it doesn't endear itself to that as much.
Because it's hard to have 8 great matches in one night.
Right.
We saw it, God, what was that? The 2019 Best of Super Juniors. There's 2 Korakuen nights that are just 10 Super Junior matches. And those, I mean, that's the upper echelon of like have a bunch of great matches on the same night.
Right.
I think one of those was my show of the year that year. I think it was the show with Osprey and Bandito, maybe. Doesn't matter. But yeah, you're not gonna. Most great G1 nights, even if you think about it, had 3 really great matches on them.
Usually, yeah.
Yeah. Were there cards that gave you that in this tournament? I don't know, maybe not, right? Like even 3 great matches when they were on the 8 the 8 match shows, but they could, right? Like I've said for a long time, like this year ain't about this year, it's about
it is
next year and 2 years down the line. But they finished it like it was about this year.
I mean,
and I think that's a fine line. When I think about great bookers, you have to reset some stuff sometimes. And this felt like a big reset. And I think you found out what you had with some of these guys. And I think that's kind of good too, right? Like you found out a lot about a lot of different wrestlers. And, even if you decide to keep going with 32, I think you can continue to tweak the format and make it feel like, like it grows a little bit more, right? I think we just went straight from like a bunch of matches that you have to a bunch of meaningful matches, right? So the first 10 nights were just a bunch of matches that you had to have to set up the last 7 nights. I think you could pepper in some importance into some of those earlier cards, but I think that, this year was significantly better in the sense of scheduling than last year. And I think that if we continue to do the same kind of format going forward, like I would be super happy with it. Like I really enjoyed the quarter final and semifinals. Like I don't think anything's ever going to replace like a really fun and a little bit complicated block final night, but you still do get to do that. But the stakes are a little lower, right? So you're really fighting for second place. And I think that hurts the block format a little bit. But then once you get into the knockouts, everything's intense. And I think that's the trade-off.
Another thing too, though, to keep in mind is like, okay, with the old format, right? During its biggest heyday, you had blocks where you had the likes of like Shingo, Kenny Omega, Will Ospreay, Tomohiro Ishii, Hiroshi Tanahashi, Kazuchika Okada. The list goes on and on, all in their primes. And not all of those guys are still here, and not all of those guys are still in their primes. So it's very much a situation where we are rebuilding. We're building to the future and also transitioning out some of the older guys all at the same time. And that's it. We're just not in that period that we used to be in from that perspective, but we are building to something that could be as good or even potentially better. One thing I liked is, I heard a lot of complaints from, different analysts about the way the business that they were doing during this tournament and what they were drawing and everything. And granted, tournament numbers were down from attendance, but for the last 2 nights for Ryogoku, they were actually up over last year, which was a
huge up.
Yeah, that's a great sign. And then what I think that they've done, like you mentioned, Chris, is they've taken these A, B, C, and D block finals and then combining that with the 3-night with the 8 knockout rounds or whatever following that. Maybe they didn't draw their biggest numbers for those houses, but I don't know that people necessarily understood how important those shows were going to be.
Sure.
And now they've kind of set the precedent that these are really big evenings. And I won't be surprised at all if you start seeing the A, B, C, and D block finals all having a major uptick in business, as in addition to them doing big business on the last 3 nights as well. And that's not only good from a fan perspective, because there used to be that old adage, you're on like night 12, night 13 of the G1, you're like, oh God, I got to drudge through it. But ultimately now you're at like night 12 and you're like, oh, okay, we're like getting to
it was a quick corner.
Finals.
Yeah, it was a quick corner into like, oh, we're okay, here we go. It's like set you off into a little bit of a panic where you're like, someone was like, oh, we're halfway through the G1. I was like, pal, by number of matches, we're 78% through this thing. Like we are way past half.
Yeah, so like you cram everything into the first half and then you're almost done. And then suddenly when you're in that lull period that you think is going to be a lull period, it's not anymore. The stakes are way higher because you're towards the end. And then the last 7 nights are nothing but high stake matches. And from a certain perspective, as a fan watching, that's palatable. It's very enjoyable. It's great to analyze. And I think that long-term for business, it's going to be better for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, people are going to see the roster. If they stay with 32, people are going to see the roster every year and point at it and say it's watered down or da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. These tournaments require having people who lose.
Yeah.
Like if you scale it out, you had the same number of guys that quote unquote couldn't win the tournament by percentage. I'm sure it's about the same in a 20-person block in a 20-person tournament as it is in the 32. So like, don't talk to me about bloat. Like, get it together. Like, do some math.
Well, I mean, you think about like, let's say like in 2018, a really, really, really stacked tournament, and there wasn't very much fat to trim off. You have a guy like Juice Robinson just getting obliterated in the tournament because people have to lose. If you don't have people that can lose, then some of the guys that you love are just going to get fucked.
Then it looks like 90s All Japan. I mean, and we already had a bunch of draws, and that brings us to the 20-minute time limit, which we can now reflect on completely, because I think it's important to reflect on it after you have seen the no time limit matches, right? So ultimately, the 20-minute time limit matches felt so different from the no time limit knockout matches.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the whole, like the benefit to the booking is that you can do more draws and they're more believable and you don't have to spend as much time on them, right? Because 20 minutes really in the world of New Japan Pro Wrestling is not that long of a match. So while potentially some of your block work rate or output, we'll say, was a little bit lower, right? Like look at Ospreay and Okada. was it what everyone thought it was going to be? No, because because Okada's pacing and to some extent Ospreay's pacing is usually for a 30 to 45-minute match in a big spot like that, not a 20-minute match. So of course you're going to reduce a little bit of that output, but it makes the knockouts feel so much bigger because they're no time limit. They go longer. They're paced differently. They feel the big match feel comes into the building and swells along with those matches. So I think that, while they used it a lot to balance some of the booking, and I think that they can continue to do that, this was classic New Japan booking where they give you a lot of one thing to establish that it's possible down the line. So if we're going to do 20-minute time limit G1s from now on, I think you'll see the draws start to reduce, right? You're still going to pepper some in as you go here, but it's like when Gabe Kidd was establishing his character at the beginning of this tournament, and he was, people were saying like that his matches weren't good, but they kind of knew what they were doing. He was doing the same thing over and over and over again on every single night to establish that that's his thing. So kind of what happened this year, and it worked out with the Three Musketeers thing, and it was the right timing to make this change and to make this pivot. So now you've got the 20-minute time limit. You believe that draws are possible, right? When less than 1% of the matches that have ever happened in this tournament are a draw, at some point, even when I'm looking at, people doing pick'ems and stuff, I'm like, you're picking way too many draws. Like they just don't happen that often. And they're usually very important matches when they do. So now they might not be that important. So you've added this third result that's totally possible to all the matches going forward in the G1, especially if you stick with the 20-minute time limit. So this was establishing what the G1 might look like for the next 10 years in that way. So, if you look at 2012 as the big reset, or 2013, pick your G1 to set up what the tournament format, structure, and kind of, I guess, belief system was going to be for the next, what turned out to be 9 or 10 years. I think we just saw the G1 that's going to do the same. And I think, towards the tail end of that decade stretch, maybe we're looking at some more classic tournaments once people are really used to and have built their strategies of how to get through it. So
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like this G1, I think we're going to end up looking back on it in 5 or 6 years as something really special that they're still drawing stories out of. And I think that that's such a cool thing to see in real time.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I would say with the 20-minute time limit is I concur. I'm not going to add much more to what you said, but the only match to me, the entire tournament, the only match that felt like it was hampered by the 20-minute time limit was the aforementioned Ospreay Okada, which I get it. There were some people that were upset about it in real time when it occurred. But for me, if that's the only match where I'm watching it and I'm like, I could have used more, to me, that's a good thing, because the rest of the tournament, which was tons and tons and tons of matches, I felt satisfied almost entirely across the board. And ultimately, I don't even feel like the 20-minute time limit was the issue in that match as much as the workers themselves maybe not working the right pace and right style for what they needed to accomplish in that time period. Let's go through a couple block things here just real quick. So, just overarching thoughts. For me, I loved the A block, and I really enjoyed what they did there. They kept all the Three Musketeers sort of they kind of canceled one another out, and they all did the draws and everything like that. I don't know if I felt like coming out of this that we have the strong sense of the future the way I was hoping we would, with the way it all shook out. But ultimately, we got some really great matches. And I do think that, even if it's not clear today what they're doing with all these guys, it is like what you mentioned. In 3 years, we'll be able to look back and still point to this tournament as the genesis or the launching pad for what they're going to be doing down the road with these guys.
Yeah, I mean, the A block was the most interesting block for sure. Just because you didn't really know where any of these guys stood. And you figured one of them was going to elevate out, and they didn't. And I think that, they all kind of got a signature thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hikuleo got out of the block. Tsuji got a win, one extra point than the other guys. Like they all got one little thing.
Narita stopped Kiyomiya.
Yeah, right. So, and Numino got, what did Numino do? He had a thing. It's been a long tournament. 119 matches. 119 matches, folks. Covered them all. So, but yeah, I mean, again, it wasn't about necessarily where these guys are at now. Everyone always wants the Rocket. And it's just not how New Japan works. And someone wanted someone in this block to get the Rocket, or at least some version of the Rocket. And it's not how it's going to go. Speaking of the Rocket, do you know where you and I were 2 years ago today?
Yeah, we were in LA together.
We were eating Korean barbecue in LA, hoping to see Yu Uemura do some damage at the beginning of his excursion the next night. But that, the Rocket reminded me of him, right? Another guy who's not a Three Musketeer, who's going to come back a little bit later. And
right.
If we're paralleling 2012, 2013 to 2023, maybe there's parallel. So, but we saw advancement. Shota Umino looks like a different wrestler now than he did at the beginning of the G1.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like if anybody was benefited the most out of anybody else in that block in terms of elevation and improvement, it was probably Shota Umino.
Yeah.
Even if he wasn't like quote unquote elevated above the others, it very much feels like he was elevated above the others.
He now has an aura.
Yeah.
Like now he's got that feel. And you saw it a little bit in the Ren in the tag match on the G1 finals, because Ren and Shota are clearly going to have a program going out of this. But Shota's got a vibe now. And he looks tremendous. He's finally like fully in shape. Like the man's got abs. Like his pants are staying up. Like he looks so good. But he figured it out. He needed 7 singles matches to figure out his aura for his singles matches that he's not connecting himself to, Tanahashi or Moxley or whatever.
We don't need to relitigate the entire Kiyomiya thing again, but one thing I would have loved is if they had done the knockout round with him and Kiyomiya at the end. I would have loved if they'd done that. I feel like if there was ever time for them to have done that in this tournament, that was the prime time to do it.
When I saw that as a possibility, I was like, that's exactly what's happening. Because
I did too.
It brings both guys up, and even, cynical Joe Lanza even was like, yeah, that's the thing. That's what we're doing. It gives a little to both of them, blah, blah, blah. Everyone that heard the theory was like, yep, that's it.
I was bought in.
It was like, and I feel bad that I like highlighted it as a possibility, but and then they actually made it a possibility with Tama Tonga and Shingo, which was just, it was like Gato playing with me, but yeah, I think it would have been cool too. You love to see something unorthodox like that.
One last thing on the A block, and we'll move on. Obviously the top performer in the block, Sonata, the world champion, he goes undefeated, beats everybody in the block. But to me, he wasn't necessarily what I'd call the MVP, like the top performer. For you, Chris, like who was your MVP of the A block?
For me, the A block was all about showing what potential you have. So it was Shota.
Yeah,
in a sense of like output, it's tough because they were all kind of right in the same lane.
They were very close. I think for me, ultimately, down the stretch, I think it's Kiyomiya. I think he had the most great.
He looked really good
performances.
I know I kind of dumped on him earlier. Like he's
right.
I think he's booked lower than his potential, and I agree with all the Noah fans that believe that.
Yeah.
And then Noah, as a company, at least this is the way I see it. They didn't protect him. They sent him to the G1 and they didn't say like, okay, it's almost like I was talking to someone and I was like, Tony Khan knew exactly the results of every Eddie Kingston match that was going to happen in this tournament. And he knew exactly what it was going to be and where it was going to lead and how it was going to affect things. Kiyomiya, on the other hand, didn't have anyone looking out for him. At least that's how it feels. Like that's the perception that I think is going around, is that Kiyomiya didn't have anyone looking out for him to make sure that every loss he got or draw was at least intentional and maybe was going to lead towards something, or maybe he was going to have a little eye down with Okada or something, right? There's going to be something that comes out of this that isn't just a young lion coming back with him to Noah, which is cool. It's super neat. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall when I saw the undercards for the non-tournament matches for the tournament or the whatever knockout matches. Hard to not say tournament a bunch of times there. That for whatever reason they had connected him with Oiwa, and I knew Oiwa was looking to go out on an excursion around the same time as Fujita. So I was like, maybe Oiwa was going to Noah. So here we are. And that's exactly what's happening. So I just don't know how you circle that back into New Japan though. I mean, I think that's more about Oiwa than it is about Kiyomiya. So it's, I don't know. I mean, the booking really didn't do him any favors. And I know that that's what everyone that's got a Noah podcast has been saying about Kiyomiya for the last like 4 or 5 years too. So where does the blame lie with that?
Yeah. Well, putting all that aside, just in terms of like the big matches, it's like, I thought he looked like a star. I thought he had the most consistently great match or great performances throughout that A block, and sort of a little bit of an unsung fact. Moving on to the B block, it really kind of came down for the most part to being like a 2-man block. I mean, you had Ospreay and you had Okada there, and certainly there was a lot of other great matches and great stories, and the resurgence down the tail end of ELP and his, heartbreaking loss to Ospreay. But like when you look at those numbers, you look at those performances, the two guys that came out of the block, Ospreay and Okada, they pretty much dominated. And even in the the knockout rounds of the final 8, they were probably 2 of the best performers of the entire tournament. I really don't know who the MVP of quote unquote of the whole tournament is. I'd have to do some math, but it's got to be one of those 2 guys. Like they're considered probably 2 of the best wrestlers in the world today. They proved it, and they were phenomenal. And this might be Okada's best tournament ever.
Yeah. You know who else was really great though? And I agree with you, like wholeheartedly. But if Okada's 1A or whatever, Ospreay's 1B, your mileage may vary on that. Like pick your poison. Taichi.
I was gonna say, I know you're going with Taichi.
Taichi, holy shit! This dude had a tournament.
Yeah.
Okada, but also the Okada match and the Ospreay match. I mean, the Ospreay match was one of my favorite matches I've ever seen.
I loved that match.
I loved that match so much.
It like got forgotten. Like it happened and people just moved on, and it was one of the best matches of the tournament.
I have a serious agenda to make sure that it does not get forgotten, because and I'm not gonna high horse how people star rate or whatever, but when you call it one of your favorite matches of all time, just give it 5 stars. But like whatever. I know the star thing is basically everyone just annexing how Dave does it, which has nothing to do, quote unquote, has nothing to do with how he feels about the match. But either way, like that was one of my favorite matches. And then the Okada match was also one of my favorite matches. The Phantasmo match was great. The Okan match was different. Taichi likes to throw in a themed match in most of his tournaments. With Ibushi, you had the kick match. With Okan, you had the mat wrestle match. So, but prior to the knockout stage, the El Phantasmo Will Ospreay match was my match of the tournament. In the sense of kind of like classic star ratey type, how I would look at wrestling. Like I just thought that match was so great too. So, there was a lot of good stuff in the B block, but I really don't want Taichi's performances to get lost in the shuffle, because they were a little early and they were on shows that didn't get quite as much buzz. But that Ospreay match was perfect.
I think night in and night out, B block much more overperformed what I was expecting across the board. Because while those 2 guys were great, there were a lot of people on the undercard on the other part of the block that were really great as well. Yeah, so it was very, very, very good, very enjoyable. In the C block, I was a little disappointed in the C block. This was one where I looked at it on paper and I saw those bruisers and I thought we were going to get a lot of, classic hard hitting matches. And we did have some for sure, but a lot less than what I was expecting. It felt like a very inconsistent block,
Yes, my dog agrees. Yeah, so but this was the block that you look at it and you're like, that's a bunch of G1 dudes. Like, but it's not any high-end G1 dudes. It's the guys that the high-end guys have the great matches against. So, I think that there was some risk of putting all these guys that are very similar in the same block together. And I think that risk ended up being true. I think the other thing that worked against C block was that they ultimately had to cover for D block. So D block, I shared this at the beginning of the tournament. D block was it's the oldest G1 block of all time. So I referred to D block as the minute managers. So these guys were managing minutes for sure, because for the block matches, the D block averaged 10 minutes and 50 seconds per match, which is over 3 minutes shorter than any other block and almost a full 4 minutes shorter than the C block. So the C block had to run the longer matches on the C and D nights, and which means they had to run the longer matches for six of their 7 block nights. So that truly, I think, worked against the C block, because some of these dudes would have benefited from like a hell of a sprint, but they had to stretch it to 15 instead of going 9 or 10.
Yeah, and I mean, the funny thing is, like with the D block, like you mentioned, even though it was an older block, and I sort of had low expectations for a lot of their performances, I don't know, because it was shorter, they were very they weren't egregiously bad. Like, it was inoffensive entirely. Like, I still ended up liking a lot of their matches regardless. I feel like for me, like, out of those 2 blocks, like, my MVP would probably be like Zach in the D block.
Sure.
Kyle had a very strong tournament as well, but I feel like I enjoyed Zach the most. And then in the C block, maybe Shingo, but it's probably Ishii.
I mean, really, anyone you pick is kind of a chalk pick.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, right? You could say Shingo because he's Shingo, Ishii because he's Ishii. Hinari had a bit of an elevation, at least.
I think he had a really great breakout tournament, even if the booking didn't reflect it.
Yep, he looked great. You could potentially see Hinari being one of those guys that they step up every year right now. So like maybe this year was the 4-point year, next year 6, maybe he's going to get to 8. Maybe eventually he's got a run where he like actually puts together a really good tournament from a win-loss perspective. So, and Tama Tonga's your like stable, steady, good hand kind of guy.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's what that block was, right? And D block was the old standards, right? And you got kind of the old standard with him until they all heated up towards the end, and bless him for doing that.
Yeah.
But no one really broke out of the D block. I thought Coughlin looked good and he's interesting and all that, but they didn't give him
the chance.
Yeah, like he didn't get a moment. And I do like to kind of say that almost everyone in every G1 gets kind of a thing, right? They either get a streak or they get a losing streak that they're going to break out of, or they get a big win over someone. I mean, Coughlin beat Tanahashi, so that was his thing, I guess. If you're looking at like what was their establishing moment, clearly that is an establishing moment, but he didn't do it in a big spot. It was kind of the Chase Owens spot.
Shane Haste beat Naito. That was a big deal,
right?
For him.
Yeah. So like I said, so like everyone gets a thing, whether it's moving on or that moment where they can point to and say like, "Hey, I beat this guy."
I heard a theory that the Shingo and Tama Tonga draw was a botch. I don't know that I buy into it, but I think it's plausible based on the way that the math all played out at the end, that maybe that wasn't supposed to happen that way, or at least that's something I've heard.
Is that because they didn't work it like
they didn't work it like it was supposed to be a draw, and it was almost
yeah, but
like
I think in that situation they would just go to the finish.
they didn't realize.
How do you not?
They
I'm
don't
calling
know.
it every 30 seconds.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know.
I don't know.
I find that hard to believe because it's not like it was. There weren't really any signs of that to me.
Yeah. Well, it's just something I'd heard.
Yeah,
I thought I'd throw it out there.
Yeah, I don't know. With two guys like that too, two pros, that'd be tough to believe.
Any final thoughts that you want to? Any last things you want to talk about with this G1?
I mean, I can go all day, but I'll spare everyone. No, I think it was. I think the tournament, as I look back on it, I really liked the format.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it's different, and different is hard. But and I like the 20-person format too, but I think this year's tournament was more interesting for having been formatted this way. I would have been really frustrated if they formatted it the same way as last year's, right? With the one match from every block and every night, like that didn't work, right? Thank goodness they pivoted away from that. But yeah, I really enjoyed the tournament. I enjoy where I think New Japan is headed. I mean, I tweeted earlier, I tweeted a whole list of the programs that are going to be coming up for New Japan and kind of everything that got set up on some of these undercards and what it looks like going forward. And I just think that after seeing and hearing that crowd in Ryogoku, I think if we can get even 60% of that on any more of these shows, and the next big show is again in Ryogoku in October, I think we're up for a pretty good run towards Wrestle Kingdom.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully Naito can keep this momentum that he has going and turn in some vintage performances on his way to the Dome. Yeah, I agree. I liked the tournament format. The only two big things I would really criticize is there was a couple booking decisions that I've already voiced on this podcast that I would have maybe preferred that they changed leading into the final 8, but it is what it is. As far as the actual entrance, I do think that there probably could have been some other people considered for inclusion in the tournament that weren't included this year, as opposed to, a couple others. But ultimately, I feel like they're working out the kinks, and this format is a benefit and long-term. Like you said, this is a rebuilding tournament where a lot of big names, big stars for the future are really being set up here. And we're going to see how the rest of those guys fare in the next year or two as things stretch out. But in the meantime, it's still a Naito and Okada world. They're still at the top of the roost. And, Sonata's probably not long for this world with that gold. But
it looks like he's going to make it to Wrestle Kingdom.
Going to make it to Wrestle Kingdom, which I never thought.
Right. I kept pointing at the Okada situation because I was like, okay, Naito's going to win the G1. Everyone's going to think it's going to be Naito Sonata, but then Okada is going to swoop in and Sonata's going to lose the title. So I'm a little surprised that I don't really see a path towards Sonata not entering Wrestle Kingdom as the champion. And that to me is really interesting.
Especially
not bad.
If they do it the traditional way and he just has the one October defense and that's it, then it's a lock. And it is smart in a certain sense. Granted, I'm not excited about seeing Evil wrestle, right? I'm not. But one thing that always is a tried and true victory for New Japan is when they put him in a big spot where no one wants to see him win and then he loses. It's always successful. And they're gonna, like, for everyone that's like, oh, Sonata's not over, he's gonna be fucking huge over on that night, because no one's gonna, unless they shit the bed, and that will be, if they shit the bed and people are apathetic on that night, that would be
it won't happen though.
It's not gonna happen because nobody is going to want to see Evil beat Sonata and go to the Dome as champion.
That match is going to be humongous.
It's going to work. And so
the heat's going to be huge. It's going to be great. Everyone's going to complain about it leading up to it. No one's going to admit that they loved it.
So that's where we're at.
It's all going to happen. I can see it now.
Now, we're gonna, like I said at the start of the show, we didn't take questions. I'm gonna skip the news. There were some noteworthy additions for the upcoming shows. Next week, I'll be reviewing the All-Star Junior Festival as well as the Multiverse United. We're having Floyd Johnson from All Things Elite coming onto the show to review those with me. I don't have the updated list of combatants and cards. I know that Enzo got added to the show, which
real one, please.
Yeah, which is kind of
real one.
I don't know what we're doing, but the last thing we'll leave you guys.
He's friends with your friend.
Yeah, I know.
So put the puzzle pieces together.
The excursion match of the week, I decided to go ahead and review the death match that took place this past week on the Freedom Show, which was El Desperado and Jun Kasai taking on Masashi Takeda and Rina Yamashita in a thumbtack board and razor cross board alpha death match. This was from Freedom's Yokohama Rush 2023. This was on NJPW World, I believe, as a pay-per-view. And it's got a pretty high score on Cage Match, sitting at like an 8.23 with 12 votes. Chris, this was not my cup of tea whatsoever. I'm not necessarily the biggest deathmatch guy, and I'm definitely also, and there's nothing wrong with it, but just personally, I'm not the biggest intergender fan either. And this was certainly very, very violent, very, very bloody, and very, very hard hitting. But for me, oftentimes for like a death match to kind of register on the radar for me, it's either got to be like tied into some sort of like very personal story that is blowing off and the emotions are kind of tied into it, or there's got to be some other level of importance. Like, for instance, the tag team death match that they did at the show back in July, there wasn't a story necessarily tied into that too much, but seeing all those legends interact with one another in a dream match scenario was like very mind blowing. But this match was like everyone just started bleeding like right off the bat. Like, we're talking like everybody literally getting bust open hard way. Desperado's going right into the tacks. Him and Jun Kasai came out in all white, so you knew that they were gonna get with the shit like right away. And I think for fans of deathmatch wrestling, this is probably a very like high-end match because there's a lot of action. I didn't know the backstory, but like Yamashita and Takeda, they like had some sort of beef or issue and they weren't on the same page, but they had to work together. And there was like a mix of comedy, but also Puro, but also, there was just like too many elements. I didn't really ever get drawn into the match on that level because it was so much spectacle.
Yeah. Little known fact about me, I love death matches. I love them. And my first exposure to Japanese pro wrestling was, Terry Funk in death matches in Japan. That was like the first stuff I ever like hunted on like LimeWire back in the day. I would never claim to be a tape trader. I was the first person to download anything that ever showed up that I had to play on like some weird, web video player, right? Like that's where my wrestling fandom hunt started. So I love death matches. This one, again, like kind of like you said, it just didn't really land for me. I didn't feel the intensity. And some of that's probably my, lack of familiarity with some of the guys in play, but when you put someone like Jun Kasai in a ring, I'm all in, right? And I love that shit. So, I think people probably look at me as New Japan guy and think all I like is the New Japan stuff, but I will hunt down some death matches if they're good. I think violence for violence sake is lame, but yeah, so this match, I pretty much agree with how you felt about it. It didn't quite get to that level where you're like either cringing or, fearful for anyone. Like
right.
It was kind of your run of the mill death match with a special, corner to turn.
Yeah.
So it was fine.
A lot of plunder. The finish was pretty gnarly where Jun Kasai ends up hitting a J driller on Takeda on a bunch of cut up cans, which was pretty nasty, but that was like the highlight of the match for me. One thing is, like, I don't think that Desperado's ever won a death match up to this point.
So that's the story.
And that's part of the story, but he also didn't pick up the pinfall victory. So I don't know if that, like, how that counts on the ledger for him, but he was on the side of the victory team along with Jun Kasai. So that probably plays into it a little bit, but I'd probably go like 3 3/4. I would say if you want to see this match, if you're interested, definitely I'd recommend it. I thought it was good, but it's not going to be in contention for like excursion match of the year or anything like that. This next coming up week, there's quite a few excursion matches happening. I know that like Stardom is having both women's titles defended, and then there was some other really big match coming up.
Oh yeah, the Stardom show happened about at the same time as the G1 show.
Yeah, so I might check out one of those, or there was some other big match that was happening that involves someone from New Japan. I can't recall, but I'll bring you guys something next week. In the meantime, that's going to do it for the show. Chris, you want to get your plugs in for us?
Oh God, I think I've been plugged enough over the last month if you've been watching New Japan Pro Wrestling, but you can find me on Twitter at the Chris Samsa, sportofprowrestling.com. Yeah, that's what I've got going on. We're doing some back end work on Sport of Pro Wrestling that I think people will really end up enjoying. So I guess keep an eye out for that, but it's not really imminent, but y'all are going to be able to do what I do for yourselves if you want to, which I think will be kind of an interesting way to approach putting together the website for now. And I'm rebuilding the archive there. So you'll have, if you kind of go back and do rewatches for pretty much anything New Japan related for the last 5 years, you'll be able to really easily find my work, which helps set up where everyone is at the beginning of those shows. So, because I think we are getting into a space where people start to rewatch stuff from 2018, 2019, 2020. So that's what I've got going on, other than probably covering some AEW stuff for my friends too. I'll be at All Out if anyone wants to meet up for a hot dog and a handshake. I'll be around the United Center that weekend, and but yeah, otherwise I like to take an opportunity. I know a lot of the people that listen to Keepin' It Strong Style are also the people that interact with me on Twitter and signal boost some of my stuff. So I just want to say that I really appreciate the listenership, and I'm glad we were able to connect here to bookend the G1 tournament, which I thought was a really good tournament, and I'm proud to have covered my 5th G1 doing stats and info. So it's been quite a ride, and I hope to keep it going. But you never know. Depends who's around.
Well, we look forward to the things you got coming up with the website. That all sounds very very cool and interesting, and we appreciate you coming here, being on the show. Hopefully, if you're hearing this made air. I've recorded it properly and everything goes well. But thank you for coming on the show. We really, really, really appreciate it. Next week, I'm going to be back to review All-Star Junior Festival, as well as the Impact / New Japan Multiverse United, whatever that show is called. If you've enjoyed today's show, please consider making a donation. Visit socialsuplex.com/donate. Click on the donate button under the Keepin' It Strong Style logo. Make sure to connect with us on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Reddit. You can also email the show, Jeremy at socialsuplex.com. Check out all of our other shows on the Social Suplex Podcast Network, One Nation Radio with Rich Ladd and James Boyd, All Things Elite with Floyd Johnson Jr. and Austin Sumowitz. Floyd will be joining me next week for my review, and The Wrestling Disaster with Danny Kugler. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review. We'll catch you next week on Keepin' It Strong Style, the ace of podcasts.
Thank you for listening to Keepin' It Strong Style. We'll see you next time.